Tonight we're pulling off the highway and into the loneliest corners of Texas, where rest stops stretch out under buzzing lights and endless black skies. These places are meant for safety, for a quick pause before the next mile, but what if they hide something else? Something watching, waiting, and never letting you leave. From empty trucks with engines still running to voices whispering in deserted bathrooms, get ready for 20 of the creepiest Texas rest stop horror stories that will make you think twice before stopping again. But before we begin, here's something unsettling. Most viewers make one chilling mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss the most disturbing, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's step into the shadows of Texas rest stops and dive into the darkness. The first night Marcus noticed it, he told himself it was nothing. He had been on the road since noon, hauling a load of furniture down I-35, tired and glassy-eyed as the miles blurred together. The rest stop appeared like a mirage on the side of the highway, one of those empty places lit by a few buzzing lamps and not much else. He pulled in, stretched his legs, and glanced across the lot. There it was, parked at the far end near the tree line, a faded red 18-wheeler with no company markings, just a streaked body and a film of dust. Its headlights were off, but the glow of the dashboard light flickered faintly. Marcus didn't think twice. Truckers pulled in and out of rest stops every hour, and maybe this guy was sleeping off a long haul. But when he got back into his own rig, he glanced again and saw no movement in the cab. No shadow, no tilt of a head against the window, just the faint purr of an engine. The second night he stopped at the same rest area. It was past midnight, nearly the same time as before. To his surprise, the truck was still there. Same spot, same angle, same faint glow behind the windshield. He slowed as he pulled past, curiosity rising in his chest. No sign of anyone around. No trash or fresh tire tracks on the gravel nearby, just the silent giant resting there. The engine was still idling. He felt a flicker of unease then, a prickle at the back of his neck. Engines don't idle for 24 hours without somebody tending them. That night he dreamt of red taillights flashing in the dark, glowing like eyes in a rearview mirror that wouldn't disappear no matter how fast he drove. On the third night he promised himself he would keep going, but the weight in his bladder and the stiffness in his legs forced him to turn in. The rest stop was quiet as ever, the air thick with summer humidity and the buzz of cicadas in the trees. When his headlights swept across the lot, his chest went cold. The truck was still there, exactly the same position, nose facing north, parked against the edge of the woods like it had never moved. He felt it now, something heavier than coincidence pressing against him. Marcus parked closer than before, telling himself it was only because he wanted to stretch his legs under the lights rather than near the tree line. He stepped down, the gravel crunching under his boots. The night air carried the faint smell of diesel. The red truck's exhaust pipe pushed out a faint curl of smoke. The engine was still running, steady and low. He walked a little nearer, nerves chewing at him. He told himself he'd knock on the door, maybe check if the driver needed help, though the thought of approaching it made his chest tighten. He paused 10 feet away, the truck looming above him like some hulking beast asleep but aware of him. He raised a hand but froze. Through the glass he saw nothing. The cab was empty. The driver's seat was bare. The passenger side too. No jacket slung over the back, no soda cup in the holder, no duffel bag on the floor. Just an empty space bathed in faint dashboard light. Marcus took a step back, pulse racing. He could feel heat radiating off the hood. It was as if someone had been driving only minutes ago. He circled halfway around, eyes darting for any sign of life. Nothing. The back trailer doors were locked, no gaps to peek through. He felt eyes on him even though there was no one in sight. A rustle came from the tree line behind the truck, leaves shifting though the air was still. He turned sharply but saw only darkness beyond the glow of the sodium lights. Something about that darkness seemed thick, as though it held shape and weight. He hurried back to his own rig, shut the door harder than he meant to, and sat gripping the wheel until his knuckles ached. He left without using the restroom. The next day he asked a fellow trucker at a diner if he had ever seen a red 18-wheeler parked near mile marker, 24. The man looked at him strangely and shook his head. That rest stop's been dead for years. Folks say it's not safe after dark. I never pull in there. Marcus wanted to press but didn't. He couldn't shake the sense of being watched as he drove on, and every mirror seemed to show the faint outline of red behind him, though the highway was clear. On the fourth night, sleep-deprived and shaking, Marcus swore he wouldn't stop. But as the hours passed, his eyes grew heavy and the lines of the road began to blur. When the sign for the rest area appeared again, his hands seemed to turn the wheel on their own. He rolled in and there it was waiting. Same spot, same glow. His heart pounded as he parked further away this time. He locked his doors and shut off his lights but left the engine running. The red truck idled across the lot, exhaust puffing in quiet rhythm. He watched it through the windshield for what felt like hours. Not once did a figure move inside. At one point he swore he saw the passenger door shift as if it had opened just a crack. He leaned forward, breath fogging the glass. The door shut again with a faint metallic thud, though no one had entered or left. He wanted to leave, but when he turned the key, his rig sputtered and stalled. He tried again. Nothing. The gauges flickered and died. Across the lot, the red truck's headlights suddenly blazed to life, washing the trees in harsh white. Marcus froze, sweat slick on his skin. The light stayed on for a long minute before shutting off. Then silence, save for the steady idle of its engine. Marcus sat trembling until dawn. When the first light broke, he started his truck without trouble and pulled out, not daring to glance back. He drove until his body ached, desperate to put miles between himself and that rest stop. But that night, when he pulled into a different area miles away, he saw it again. Same red truck, same spot near the edge of the trees. The engine was still running. Darren figured it was just road trip boredom playing tricks on him. He had a 10-hour drive cutting across Texas east to west, from his college in Beaumont to visit his sister in El Paso. He liked driving at night because it was cooler, the roads emptier, but the darkness weighed heavy across the highways that seemed endless, pinning him between shadows. He stopped at his first rest area outside of Lufkin around 9 in the evening, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and soda machines humming like dying insects. The restroom smelled like bleach fighting a losing battle against decades of piss. On the inside of the stall door, scratched deep into the metal, was a name, Kayla, and beneath it a date. That date was today's September 14th. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. Maybe Kayla had been here this morning. People carved names everywhere. Coincidence. Still, it stuck with him as he drove back out under the swaying pines, the letters stamped in his mind like they wanted to be remembered. An hour later, he pulled into another stop outside Nacogdoches. He was nursing too much coffee and the highway miles were burning his eyes. This bathroom was worse, reeking of mildew. As he shut the stall door, his heart slipped. There it was again. Kayla with the same September 14th etched below, though it looked fresher here, less rust bleeding from the scratches. He ran his hand over it, rough and sharp. He stood there longer than necessary, the hair on his arms rising. When he left, he scanned the parking lot, expecting to see some girl, maybe the culprit. But it was empty except for a trucker dozing with his cab light on. He tried the radio, flipping through static and Spanish stations, but nothing grounded him. The farther west he drove, the more the landscape emptied. Pine gave way to open stretches of grass, fence lines broken with the occasional rusting barn. His headlights carved a tunnel out of the blackness, and every few miles a pair of glowing eyes from the side of the road blinked and vanished. He thought about turning back, maybe staying in a cheap motel, but his sister was expecting him in the morning. By midnight, he had reached a lonely rest stop outside Abilene. The place was so still that when he shut the car door, it sounded like a gunshot. He didn't want to go inside, but his bladder left no choice. The stall was clean enough until he closed the door. The same name again, Kayla, and the same date. This time, the letters weren't carved. They were written in black marker, bold, thick strokes, almost still smelling of ink. His stomach dropped. He pressed his thumb against it and the marker smudged faintly, fresh as if someone had just written it. He whipped open the door and looked around. No footsteps, no sound, but the buzz of a light over the sink. He splashed his face with cold water, gripping the porcelain until his knuckles whitened. The night grew heavier as he drove farther west. The highway seemed emptier than before, as though he was the last person left pushing through Texas. His phone lost signal miles back. The sky loomed vast and cruel, the stars too sharp. He couldn't shake the sense that someone was pacing him in the dark just out of sight, keeping steady with every mile. 2 more rest stops, 2 more appearances. Each time the name Kayla, each time the date. The last one, near Odessa, had something new beneath it. A time, 3:15 a.m., he checked his phone. 2:57, his stomach turned. The air in the bathroom was so still it was suffocating. He backed out, never turning his back fully to the stall, his breath shallow. The parking lot was empty, but he felt eyes on him. The shadows by the vending machines seemed thicker than they should be. He climbed into his car, locked the doors, started the engine with hands that shook more than he wanted to admit. He told himself not to stop again. He told himself he could make it the rest of the way. But when his dash clock read 3:12, the low fuel light blinked on. He cursed aloud, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The next rest area sign promised fuel 5 miles ahead. He pressed the accelerator harder. He pulled off at 3:15 on the dot. The lot was deserted. The gas station attached to the restroom stood dark. A for lease sign faded in the window. He shouldn't have stopped. He knew that as soon as his tires crunched the gravel, but the tank was nearly bone dry. He parked, telling himself he'd just check. The restroom door creaked when he pushed it open. The smell of rot hit him like a slap, sour and ancient. Something dead locked in the walls. He didn't want to go in, but some force tugged at him, dragging him toward the stalls. The first stall was empty. The second had it carved into the door. Kayla. Beneath it, the date. Beneath the date, his own name, Darren. He froze. His tongue turned to ash, and below his name was another time. 3:20. He heard the second hand tick inside his skull. He turned slowly toward the mirrors, and though he was the only one there, the reflection showed a girl standing behind him, pale and smiling, with a knife pressed lightly against his neck. And the clock struck 3:20. The stretch of highway that cut through the pine woods of East Texas was long and lonely, especially at night when the stars pressed down like cold pinpricks in a black sky. Truckers swore by it because it shaved 20 minutes off the route to Shreveport, but the road was cursed with potholes and darkness. At mile marker 114, there was a rest stop with 2 humming vending machines that leaned against a wall of chipped brick, their fluorescent lights buzzing like hornets in the stillness. People only stopped if they had to, and those who did often spoke of a woman in a faded sundress who lingered by the machines at midnight. She was thin, her hair matted as if she had just come out of water, and she always asked the same thing in a soft, cracked voice: spare change. Tom Watkins had been driving 14 hours straight, pushing himself past the limits of reason. He had a small landscaping business out of Abilene and had just closed a deal in Shreveport, something that might keep him afloat for the season. His eyelids were heavy, his throat dry, and his hands cramped from the wheel. When he saw the blue sign for the rest area, he told himself it was just for coffee and a stretch. He pulled his battered Ford into the lot, gravel crunching under tired tires, and noticed that he was the only soul around. The vending machines glowed like twin beacons under the sodium lights, throwing a circle of pale yellow against the cracked pavement. He killed the engine, stepped out, and the night wrapped around him like a wet sheet. The air smelled of pine needles and oil. He walked to the machines, fishing for quarters, and that was when he heard it. A voice, female, quiet but close. "Do you have any change?" He turned, and she was there as if the shadows had coughed her up. She wore a sundress that might have been yellow once but had faded into something gray, stained at the hem. Her skin was pale in the fluorescent light, her eyes large and wet, reflecting the machine's glow. She looked to be in her late 20s, barefoot on the cracked pavement. Tom's first thought was that she was homeless, maybe strung out. He half smiled, uneasy, and said, "Yeah, I've got some." He slid coins into the slot, the machine coughing out a bottle of soda. He pulled a few quarters from his pocket and handed them to her. Her fingers brushed his, cold as river stones. She didn't smile. She just closed her hand around the change, turned, and walked into the dark beyond the circle of light, vanishing as if the trees had swallowed her. Tom stood there for a long second, unsettled. Then he shook himself, muttering about drifters, and walked back to his truck. He cracked the soda, took a swallow, and started the engine. The radio flickered but didn't catch a station, only static. He drove off, the rest stop vanishing behind him in the rearview mirror. But 10 miles down the road, fatigue hit him like a hammer. His vision blurred and he swore he saw movement along the tree line, pale shapes flitting just out of reach of the headlights. He rubbed his eyes, told himself he was hallucinating from exhaustion. He rolled down the window for air, but the breeze that came in was cold, far colder than the night should have been. He turned the dial on the radio, and beneath the static came a whisper, faint, but unmistakable. Spare change. His throat closed, his hands tightening on the wheel. The road stretched on endlessly, every curve the same, every mile marker a ghost of the last. His gas gauge, which should have been 3/4 full, dropped to half, then to 1/4. He cursed, tapping the glass, but the needle sank like it was being pulled by invisible hands. He glanced at the rearview mirror and his heart jolted. In the bed of his truck, lit by the weak reflection of his taillights, sat the woman. Her sundress fluttered in wind that wasn't there. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her head tilted, watching him. Tom slammed the brakes, swerving onto the shoulder, gravel spraying. He spun in his seat to look, but the bed was empty. His heart pounded against his ribs, sweat running down his back. He told himself he was imagining things, that he needed sleep, that he was just another fool scaring himself with road tales. He forced himself back onto the road, eyes fixed on the yellow lines. The next morning, a state trooper found Tom's truck idling at the rest stop, doors locked, soda bottle half empty in the console. There was no sign of Tom. The only thing out of place was a neat stack of quarters on the hood, cold to the touch though the sun had been up for hours. Stories like Tom's became common enough that they worked their way into late-night trucker chatter. Drivers warned rookies to keep their change pocketed and their eyes down if they stopped at 114. Some laughed it off, called it campfire nonsense. But over the years, cars continued to be found abandoned at the same rest stop. Always locked, always with the driver gone, and always with quarters left behind in a tidy stack. One woman from Tyler, a schoolteacher named Marlene Pierce, was driving home from a family reunion when she stopped at the machines. Her sister later told police Marlene had called her at 11:57 p.m., her voice trembling, whispering that there was someone by the vending machines asking for change. That was the last anyone heard from her. By morning, her SUV was there, doors locked, keys still in the ignition. A pair of children's shoes, not belonging to Marlene or anyone in her family, sat neatly on the passenger seat. Locals whispered that the woman in the sundress had died there decades earlier, maybe run down on the highway, maybe murdered and left in the woods. Others swore she was never human at all, that she was something older, wearing the skin of a woman, bound to the glow of the machines in the midnight hour. Truckers said if you looked close, you'd see water dripping from her hair, as if she'd just risen from a lake that didn't exist. The Department of Transportation eventually considered tearing down the rest stop, but accidents and unexplained deaths among the work crews kept delaying it. A bulldozer overturned one morning, crushing its operator, though the ground was flat. Another worker disappeared after telling his wife on the phone that he kept hearing coins dropping in the woods, though no one else heard them. By the third incident, the project was shelved, the state quietly fencing off the area. But fences rust and gates fall open. People still wander in, chasing the hum of the vending machines that should have lost power years ago, but still glow every night at midnight, buzzing, waiting. Travelers see her sometimes, barefoot, her sundress fluttering, her hand stretched out, her voice soft and cracked. "Do you have any change?" Those who answer never make it past the next bend in the highway. Highway 287 runs long and flat through North Texas, a stretch of road that feels endless after midnight, when even the faint glow of Amarillo or Wichita Falls is swallowed by black horizons and the constant hum of semis. Travelers passing through learn to keep their tanks full and their eyes sharp, because rest stops are few and far between. Mile marker 62 was one of those places drivers used to rely on, until the state shut it down in the mid-90s. On old maps, it's still marked with a small coffee cup symbol, but for decades it has been nothing more than a cracked turnout strangled with weeds and busted asphalt. Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, people say otherwise. It started with truckers. In the early 2000s, a few of them reported pulling into a brightly lit rest area around 2 in the morning. They described the place as pristine, the kind of roadside oasis you'd see in a travel brochure. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, vending machines stocked with cold sodas, polished tile bathrooms that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. Some even swore there was an attendant behind a counter who smiled and pointed them to coffee, though none could remember his face clearly afterward. Every one of them told the same thing. When they woke up in their rigs after dawn, the rest area was gone. In its place was an overgrown patch of land. The picnic tables rotted, the lights stripped, the entire stop erased by time as if it had never been rebuilt. GPS, though, still marks it. Punch in rest area, Highway 287, near marker 62. And if you're driving in the right conditions, alone, late at night, you'll see the blue sign for a rest stop appear on your map where no sign stands on the road. People who've been there say the entrance isn't visible until the last second. You'll blink, and suddenly the asphalt drive opens up smooth and inviting with bright sodium lamps guiding the way. The lot always looks freshly painted, the stripes sharp white, the grass trimmed low. Cars that pull in are few, but they're always there, spaced far apart like mannequins in a showroom. Travelers sitting stiff in their driver's seats, heads tilted back as if napping, though no one recalls hearing a car door close or footsteps echo. The vending machines hum, glowing with soft light, full of unfamiliar brands. Some swear they've seen sodas with names they don't recognize. Candy bars wrapped in faded logos that haven't been sold since the 70s. No one ever remembers actually eating anything, though. They just stand there, hand on the glass, and the next memory is always waking up in their car, sun in their eyes, the place gone. Local sheriffs shrug off the stories. Ask around Vernon or Electra and folks will tell you there's nothing but a dead patch of weeds out there. But every few years another story circulates. A college kid driving back to Dallas after a concert in Amarillo. A salesman on his way to Fort Worth who couldn't keep his eyes open. A woman and her daughter fleeing a storm. All of them swear they saw it, used it, felt the strange calm that settles when you step into its glow, and all of them report the same final detail, though it comes reluctantly, like a secret squeezed out in therapy: the silence. Even with the fluorescent bulbs buzzing and the soda machine clattering when you press a button, the place is wrong. Too quiet. Your own breath sounds like it's amplified. Your shoes on the tile echo longer than they should. And you notice that the other travelers don't move much. They don't look at you. They just sit in their cars or lean against picnic tables, faces shadowed, waiting for something you can't name. One man, a retired Air Force mechanic named Dalton, told his story to a cousin who recorded it, and it made its way onto a late-night radio show. He had stopped around 3 in the morning, desperate for caffeine. Said the coffee smelled burnt but familiar, and he poured himself a cup from a gleaming stainless steel urn. When he turned to ask the attendant a question, something about the weather ahead, he realized the man had no reflection in the mirror behind the counter. Dalton didn't scream. He didn't run. He said his mind just sort of skipped, like a record needle jumping. The next thing he knew, the sun was blazing through his windshield and his coffee cup was empty but bone dry, as if it had never held liquid. He never drove that route again. People who go looking for it rarely succeed. If you plan to find it, GPS won't always cooperate. Sometimes the route recalculates, pushing you past the mile marker before you can react. Sometimes the highway feels longer, the numbers skipping from 61 to 63 with nothing in between. But those who stumble across it by accident, late at night when fatigue eats at the edges of their vision, seem to slip into its orbit. And once you've been there, once you've breathed its antiseptic air and stood beneath its humming lights, there's no guarantee you'll come back unchanged. A few who claim to have visited describe weeks of insomnia, strange humming in their ears, faces glimpsed in the rearview mirror that vanish when they turn their heads. There was a couple from Wichita Falls who vanished in 2012. Their car was found pulled over near mile marker 62, engine cold, both doors locked from the inside. No sign of them, no footprints, no struggle. Just the car sitting on the shoulder in the early dawn. Investigators chalked it up to foul play somewhere else. But locals whispered about the rest stop, about how maybe they had pulled in and never pulled out again, and how, if you believe the rumors, their sedan was one of the cars people later saw parked under the glowing lamps of the Phantom Rest area, the couple inside unmoving, their faces hidden by shadow. Highway 287 keeps its secrets in the long black miles that stretch across Texas, where drivers fight sleep and the road seems endless. Most pass mile marker 62 without incident, just another green sign blurring past in the dark. But every so often, someone follows a blue icon on their GPS and finds themselves pulling into a place that shouldn't exist. A place frozen in time, clean and bright, waiting for weary travelers. They'll walk inside, maybe buy a soda, maybe stretch their legs, maybe lock eyes with someone whose face they'll never remember. And when morning comes, if they're lucky, they'll wake up in their car on the side of the road, weeds brushing the undercarriage. The rest stop gone. If they're unlucky, their story will never be told except in hushed tones by other drivers who swear they saw them, sitting behind the wheel in a lot that isn't there, waiting for someone else to arrive. The rest area sat off Highway 79 about 15 miles east of Palestine, Texas. Nothing more than a cracked stretch of asphalt with 2 picnic tables under rusted tin awnings, a pair of vending machines that always seemed out of order, and a squat cinder block restroom painted a shade of green that had long ago faded into gray. The trees pressed close on all sides, pine and oak growing thick and dark. And as the sun bled down into the tree line that evening, the place had the air of a stage just waiting for something to step into the spotlight. I had been on the road since before noon, driving north from Crockett toward Tyler. A long day and a longer week behind me. My head ached from the monotony of asphalt, and I pulled into the rest area as the first hints of dusk brushed the horizon, figuring I'd stretch my legs, splash water on my face, maybe dig the last half sandwich from the cooler in my back seat. That was when I saw them, a family of 4 at the far picnic table, husband and wife, early 40s maybe, 2 kids about 8 or 10. They had spread a gingham blanket across the table, set out paper plates, sandwiches, a bag of chips torn open in the middle. A cooler rested on the bench beside them, a faded red igloo like my grandfather used to carry to fishing trips. They looked ordinary, dressed in the way travelers usually are, shorts, t-shirts, sneakers. The mother laughed at something the boy said. The father raised a Coke can in mock toast. The girl swung her legs, not tall enough to touch the ground, sneakers bumping the bench post in rhythm. It was a warm and familiar scene, the kind of thing that makes you remember your own family. Roadside dinners eaten with mosquitoes buzzing and headlights from passing trucks flashing like lightning across the trees. I nodded at them as I headed toward the restroom. The father gave me a polite raise of his hand. That was all. Nothing strange. Just a family having supper on a road that cut through a forgotten piece of East Texas. Inside the restroom, the air was clammy, thick with the sour stench of disinfectant mixed with urine. The light flickered, one of those buzzing fluorescent tubes that made everything seem diseased. I relieved myself, washed my hands, splashed water on my face. It couldn't have been more than 4, maybe 5 minutes in total. When I stepped back out, the sky had grown darker, the edge of night pushing harder against the clearing. The picnic table was empty. Not just empty, abandoned. The cooler still sat on the bench. Plates still held sandwiches with bites missing. A bag of chips lay open, crumbs scattered like confetti. One of the Coke cans sweated on the tabletop, beads of condensation sliding down in the heavy air. I placed my hand on a sandwich. It was warm, the bread soft as though just torn from its wrapper. I looked around instinctively, expecting to see the family walking toward the trees, maybe letting the kids stretch their legs, but there was no one. No voices, no footfalls. Nothing but the distant hum of the highway and the drone of cicadas rising in the pines. I walked the lot twice, no car. No footsteps crunching gravel. No laughter carried from the woods. Just the table and the food, as though the family had evaporated in the time it took me to piss and splash water on my face. My chest tightened. I told myself maybe they were playing some game, hide and seek or something stupid, but the panic building under my ribs told me I didn't believe it. I looked closer at the ground near the table. There were footprints in the dust, yes, but they ended just a few paces away as if erased. Not trampled over, not covered by windblown dirt. Gone. The cooler still bore condensation, like it had just been lifted from ice water. The Coke can dripped steadily, a small wet circle forming on the wood. Nothing about it suggested a family had calmly packed up and driven away. The sun slipped further, shadows crawling out from the tree line, and I realized with a slow horror that I could not even recall what kind of car they had driven. I'd seen them, hadn't I? A vehicle parked at the end of the lot. My memory refused to provide the make or color, as if that detail had been scrubbed clean the moment I walked into that restroom. All I could remember was the family itself, sitting there smiling, alive. I backed toward my own car. The hairs on my arm stood straight, some primal alarm sounding deep in me. I opened the door and climbed inside, locking it immediately. My eyes stayed fixed on the table. The food seemed to mock me, steaming slightly in the heavy dusk air. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. Not a bar. I sat there, motor off, listening, straining for anything, any sign of them. That was when the first sound came. A laugh, high and thin like a child's voice but stretched too long, echoing strangely in the trees. It did not come from any one direction but seemed to ripple across the clearing, as though the woods themselves had laughed. Then silence again, heavier than before. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles whitened. I wanted to start the car, slam the accelerator, but I couldn't move. My eyes locked to the table. The Coke can tipped on its side. I swear to God I saw it. As if nudged by an invisible hand, it rolled an inch and came to rest, spilling soda across the wood. Then the sandwich nearest me, the one I had touched, sagged and collapsed as though rotting in fast motion. Bread darkened, lettuce wilted, meat grayed. Within seconds, the food on every plate shriveled and blackened, until the table was covered not with fresh dinner, but with moldering heaps that smelled faintly of earth and wet decay. I started the engine. The roar of it shattered the silence, but in that moment I felt every tree around me lean closer. Felt the eyes of something vast and patient pressing against the clearing. I put the car in gear, tires squealing as I tore out onto the highway, gravel spraying. My headlights carved the asphalt ahead, but every time the trees bent over the road I thought I saw faces between the trunks. Pale ovals staring, mouths working silently. I didn't stop again until Tyler, where I sat shaking in a lit gas station lot among strangers, grateful for every sound of life around me. I tried to tell myself it had been exhaustion, a trick of the brain, but I couldn't shake the memory of that warm sandwich turning to rot beneath my fingertips. A week later I checked the news, local papers, police reports. Nothing about a missing family on Highway 79. No bulletins, no names, no photos, as if they had never existed. But I know what I saw. I know what vanished while I was gone those 5 minutes. And sometimes when I'm driving that stretch again, I see the rest area up ahead in the dusk. Empty. Always empty. Except in the corner of my vision where 4 figures sit at a picnic table, waiting. The rig was still humming when Eli Mercer eased it into the gravel pull-off beside the faded green sign that read, "Rest Area, No Services." The sky over West Texas was the color of a rusted blade, half-moon sinking low behind the jagged silhouettes of mesquite and scrub. He'd been on the road for 14 hours straight, eyelids heavy, hands sore from gripping the wheel. This place wasn't much, just a cracked lot with 2 busted vending machines, a pair of bathroom stalls squatting under buzzing fluorescent lights, and a picnic bench leaning on one bad leg. He cut the engine and let the silence swallow him whole, or at least almost silence. The CB radio, his constant companion, still murmured with static, the kind that crawled over your skin like ants. Channel 19 was trucker standard, the lifeline of the lonely road, and he kept it open by habit even though traffic had thinned to nothing after Midland. He rubbed his eyes, reached for his thermos, and was about to drink when he heard it, faint at first, buried under the white hiss. "I'll help anybody on 19. God, please somebody answer." Eli froze, thermos halfway to his lips. He twisted the knob, static swelling, then clearing just enough for the voice to push through again. A man's voice, hoarse, panicked, cracking on the edge of a scream. "They're here. At the rest stop. Oh Jesus, they're inside." Eli's stomach dropped. He looked out the windshield. Nothing but still shadows. The bathrooms glowing like beacons, empty asphalt stretching toward the dark fields. He thumbed the mic. "Breaker 19, you saying the rest stop?" "Which one you talking about, driver?" The reply came jagged, broken by static. "The one off 280. Mile marker 214. They followed me here, can't..." Eli's heart stopped cold. That was this exit, mile marker 214, this rest stop. He set the thermos down carefully as if sudden movement might trigger something watching. His eyes scanned the lot. No cars, no trucks, no movement, but the flicker of moths battering the lights. The voice on the CB cracked into a scream. "They're outside the cab, pounding on the glass. Don't stop here. Don't..." The transmission cut to static so loud it filled the cab like a storm. Eli yanked the mic up again, knuckles white. "Driver, come back. You at the 214 pull-off right now?" Static. Then layered beneath a different voice. Higher, almost wet-sounding like words gurgled through a throat filling with water. "We see you." Eli jerked, staring out at the lot. The radio squealed. Voices overlapping now. Men shouting, women screaming, all of it bleeding through at once in a hellish chorus. Snatches of words clawed through the noise. "Don't open the door! They're crawling on the glass! Run, God, run!" Eli shut the volume off with a trembling hand. But the cab was not silent. The sounds were still there, faint but present, like echoes bouncing inside his skull. He swore under his breath, told himself fatigue was playing tricks, that he'd been too long on the road. He opened the door, stepped down onto gravel. The cool night air smelled of dust and oil and faintly sickly of copper. The bathrooms hummed in the distance. He walked toward them slow, boots crunching. The glow of the light cast long shadows, and as he drew closer, he noticed the vending machine's glass was cracked, spider-webbed from the inside, as though someone had hammered to get out. Not in. He stood there staring when his CB lit up again from the cab, volume knob still off, but the sound came anyway, loud as though the radio had a will of its own. Eli. The voice was low, dragging, his name pulled apart syllable by syllable. His blood turned to ice. He hadn't given his handle, let alone his name. The bathroom door creaked. He spun toward it. The men's stall door hung open, dark inside. He saw movement then, quick, spider-like, something slipping just out of sight. The smell hit next, a rot so thick it coated his tongue. He stumbled back, eyes watering, but the door slammed shut hard enough to echo across the lot. Behind him, his CB screamed with the sound of shattering glass. He turned and saw nothing in the cab, yet the headlights flicked on, beams flooding him like a stage light. Shapes flickered in the glare, tall and wrong, like men stretched too thin, standing just beyond clarity. The CB voices shrieked again, louder now. Dozens of them in unison, all describing exactly what he saw. They're standing in the lights, they're waiting for you, they're waiting. Eli broke, bolted back toward the truck. His boots slipped in gravel, breath tearing his throat raw. He hauled himself into the cab, slammed the door, hit the locks. The shapes didn't move, just waited in the beam, twitching slightly as though excited. His hands fumbled for the ignition. The engine roared to life. He threw it into gear, tires spitting gravel. As he swung onto the highway, he risked one glance in the mirror. The rest stop was receding, lights dimming behind, but the shapes were still there, clustered together, watching him go. And then, impossibly, as his headlights stretched down the empty road, he saw the glow of another rest stop ahead. Another 214. Same cracked vending machines, same buzzing bathroom light, same leaning bench. The CB hissed back to life. Breaker 19, anybody copy? They're here. At the rest stop. Oh God, don't stop. The voice was his own. Eli gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, the endless blacktop unspooling ahead of him in a loop that wouldn't break. Mile after mile, rest stop after rest stop, and the static never stopped. Voices clawing at his ears, warning him again and again of a horror he could not outrun. The first time I saw the blue pickup was on a late drive back from Abilene. The kind of empty stretch of I-20 where the gas stations close before midnight, and the radio turns into static if you hit the dial just wrong. The road was black, flat, and endless. The kind that makes you question if you've been circling the same mile for hours. I had a thermos of coffee sweating on the seat beside me, and my headlights cut out maybe 20 yards of the night before swallowing it all up again. That's when I saw it parked just off the rest stop exit. A faded old Chevy pickup the color of denim left too long in the sun. It idled in the corner near the bathroom stalls, the tailpipe coughing pale smoke into the warm Texas air. At first I didn't think much of it. Old trucks are everywhere out here and people sleep in them, eat in them, hell, some even live in them. I gave it a glance in the rear view as I rolled past, and that was when I noticed the driver. He was sitting upright behind the wheel, pale face caught just barely by the floodlight over the rest stop. He wasn't moving, not even a twitch. I glanced again, just a flick of the eyes, and when I did, the truck was still there, but the driver wasn't inside anymore. He was outside, standing near the restroom doors, closer than he should have been in that short a span of time. He faced the highway, and though I couldn't swear on it, I thought his head was turned just enough to meet mine. He never blinked. I pressed harder on the gas and let the interstate carry me away. I told myself it was just fatigue. Eyes playing tricks after hours on the road. Maybe I blinked longer than I thought. Maybe the angle of the light made him look different. But the image of that man standing outside, closer, watching, it sat in my chest like a stone. I drove another 40 miles before pulling into a truck stop to refuel. The attendant inside was a heavyset guy with a ball cap low over his eyes. When I mentioned the blue pickup, his face went flat as if I'd mentioned a relative he didn't speak to. He told me he'd heard about it from others, truckers mostly, swearing they'd seen the same thing. They called it the Watcher. Nobody ever saw it move, never saw it merge onto the road. It was just there, always waiting, and if you looked twice, the driver got closer. Some said he followed you if you pulled over. Showed up outside your car, staring through the glass. I left that truck stop with my skin crawling. Every mile back to Dallas, my eyes darted to each rest stop like a tongue prodding at a sore tooth. And sure enough, 40 miles out, there it was again. Same truck, same angle. Engine purring with that dry, rattling hum, a shadow caught in the floodlights. I didn't slow down, but instinct dragged my eyes back to the side mirror. The driver wasn't inside. He was standing by the Coke machine this time, 10 feet closer to the shoulder, facing the highway. His face was pale, lips colorless, and his eyes fixed. I didn't look a third time. I kept the wheel straight and held my breath until the truck disappeared into the dark behind me. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw his face, stiff and waxy like a mannequin left out in the sun. I dreamed of knocking on my apartment door and finding him standing there, silent, eyes wide open, breathless but somehow alive. I told myself not to drive that stretch again, but work had me traveling out there twice more that month. And each time the truck was there, not in the same spot, but always at a rest stop along I-20. Always idling, always with him behind the wheel the first time I looked, and closer the second. One night, curiosity outpaced fear, and I slowed just enough to see if he'd move. He didn't. I let my eyes fall back to the road, but temptation got me. I checked my rear view quick as a blink, and my heart froze. He was no longer standing near the rest stop. He was on the embankment halfway to the highway, his arms stiff at his sides, eyes drilling holes into me. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and didn't let up until I was 3 counties away. I tried to talk myself down. People see things in the dark. Fatigue makes shadows into monsters, but others had seen it too. One trucker swore he woke up parked beside that same blue pickup in the middle of the night. Said the driver was sitting on his hood, inches from the windshield, staring in. He never saw him move. Another told me he made the mistake of stopping to take a leak near the tree line, and when he came back, the driver was standing beside his rig, just watching, not speaking, not breathing loud enough to hear. He drove off and didn't look back, and when I asked if he'd seen the truck since, he said no, but every night he dreams of that man showing up closer, by his bed, at the foot of it, one blink away from his face. What rattles me most is the last time I saw it. It was around 2 a.m, a month ago, on a return trip from Midland. The highway was dead, my tank nearly empty. I told myself I wouldn't look, wouldn't give him the chance. But habit wins over fear. I spotted the blue pickup parked at a rest stop outside Cisco. Lights humming, smoke drifting. I looked once, saw the driver's pale face behind the wheel. My chest tightened, but I forced my eyes forward. Do not look again, I told myself, do not. Yet some magnet pulled them back to the mirror. He was standing by the roadside this time, 5 feet from the pavement, closer than he had ever been before. My foot trembled on the gas, torn between flooring it and stopping altogether. I didn't look again. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead, white-knuckled the steering wheel, and didn't blink until the truck stop in Weatherford came into view. That was the last time I saw it on the road. But here's the thing. Last night I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of an engine idling outside my apartment. When I pulled the blinds, the street was empty, not a car in sight. No headlights, no taillights, nothing but the faint choking cough of an old engine drifting in through the walls. I shut the blinds, sat back in bed, heart hammering, and then I made the mistake of looking again. And there he was. Not on the road. Not in a truck. He was standing in the middle of my parking lot under the street lamp, pale face tilted up, eyes never blinking, never leaving mine. The engine sound stopped when I gasped. When I blinked, he was gone. The space was empty, silent, but I don't know how long it will stay that way. I keep expecting to glance out again and find him closer, pressed against the glass, waiting for me to blink one last time. The women's restroom at the Panhandle rest stop had been locked for years. A quiet fixture along that lonely stretch of Highway 287, where the wind never stopped and the flat earth seemed to stretch on forever. Truckers, families, and road-worn travelers used the men's side without trouble, but the door to the women's was always chained from the inside. No one remembered when it started, only that it had been that way as long as anyone could recall. Folks joked about it, made up stories about plumbing issues, asbestos, even ghosts, but nobody really cared enough to press, not until the patrolman forced it open one humid summer night. He wasn't a rookie and he wasn't scared easily. But something about that locked door nagged at him during his late shift. He said later he could smell it before the chain snapped, a sharp tang that cut through the heat and diesel fumes of the highway. When he swung the door open, the lights buzzed faintly, casting that artificial glow across tile so clean it gleamed like it had been scrubbed an hour ago. Everything was in its place, but the smell hit him like a wall, metallic, thick, the undeniable reek of blood. The scent seeped from the walls, from the drain in the floor, from the air itself, though there wasn't a single drop visible. The story spread, as stories do out there where gossip has little else to compete with. Truckers told it to each other over burnt coffee at the all-night diner in Claude. Mothers hushed their kids with it when they asked why they had to wait for the men's room. The state came, inspected, found nothing. They unlocked the bathroom for a week before quietly bolting it shut again. Too many people complained about the smell. Too many drivers pulled over, gagging, swearing it made them sick to their stomach. The bathroom sat there, clean and perfect and useless behind its locked door year after year. I only know this because I made the mistake of being curious. I grew up in Amarillo, and like anyone who stays too long in one place, I started chasing the little oddities. Haunted grain silos, hitchhiker legends, stories about phantom lights out near Canadian. I wrote most of it down, nothing special, just late-night ramblings, but I wanted to see the bathroom for myself. One Saturday I drove out there, 2 thermoses of coffee and an old flashlight rolling around in the passenger seat, the kind of supplies you take when you know you're going to be sitting with yourself for a while. The parking lot was half empty when I pulled in, just a couple of long-haul rigs idling with their curtains drawn, and one family SUV with sun-faded bumper stickers. The air smelled like dust and sun-baked asphalt, nothing unusual. But the women's bathroom door stood at the far end, heavy chain stretched taut through the handle, a bright new padlock glinting in the sun. I sat for a long while before I got out. The door looked ordinary enough, just a government-issue beige slab with a dent near the bottom where someone had kicked it once. But I swear the closer I walked, the more wrong it felt, like the air thickened, like there was weight pressing down on the space around it. I pressed my ear to the metal and heard nothing but the hollow thrum of the building. No water rushing in the pipes, no insects buzzing, nothing, but there was a smell. Faint at first, then stronger the longer I stood there. A coppery tang that made me think of the times I'd cut my hand and pressed it to my mouth without thinking. The smell of blood, warm and iron heavy, though the padlock was sealed tight. I should have left. I should have gotten back in my car and driven home and laughed at myself for being one more fool with a ghost story. Instead, I waited until dark. The parking lot cleared as the sun sank and the rigs moved on. I had bolt cutters in the trunk, heavy and cold, and my hands shook as I fit them around the lock. The snap was louder than I expected. The chain slipped free, and for a moment I almost convinced myself it was just a bathroom after all. Just tile and toilets. But when I pushed open the door, the air rushed out like something had been holding its breath in there. The lights flickered on with a hum and everything gleamed. Perfect, spotless, as though it had never been touched. Except the smell was unbearable, so thick it coated the back of my throat and made me gag. I forced myself inside, shut the door behind me, and stood in the humming light. The mirrors were spotless. The stalls were aligned neatly, doors closed, hinges silent. The sinks shone under the fluorescent glare. It was immaculate, like a showroom, but that reek seeped from everywhere. I leaned over the drain in the middle of the floor, the round steel grate catching the light. The smell was strongest there, like the earth below was saturated with something rotten. I knelt, pressed my ear to the cool tile, and thought I heard something moving far beneath. A shifting wetness, faint but deliberate. A sound like something breathing through water. My stomach turned and I stumbled to my feet, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave, but the stalls were whispering. Not loud, not words, but the faintest creak of hinges, the scrape of something brushing the doors from the inside. One by one, the stalls began to open, slowly, carefully, until each stood ajar. Nothing waited inside, just clean porcelain toilets, gleaming bowls, and empty space. But the smell thickened, and the fluorescent lights buzzed harder, dimming until the shadows in the corners deepened like oil. I felt something watching me, not from above or around, but from below, through the tile and concrete pressing against the floor. I backed toward the door, every step slow, careful, but the hinges began to groan, the stall doors pushing wider until the last one at the far end banged open with a hollow slam. The sound rolled through the room and the air grew hot, like I was standing inside a furnace of rust and rot. I bolted, I didn't think. I ran for the door, shoved it open, and gulped the night air like I was drowning. The parking lot was empty, silent but for the cicadas, the stars scattered across the flat Texas sky. Behind me, the bathroom door shut with a click, though I hadn't touched it. When I turned, the padlock was back in place, chain threaded tight like it had never been cut. I drove home with the windows down, trying to wash the smell from my clothes, from my skin, but it followed me. I woke that night choking, the taste of iron filling my mouth, my bathroom mirror fogged, though no shower had run, and when I wiped it clean, I swore I saw the fluorescent light buzzing behind me. That same perfect row of stalls stretching on, though I stood in my own little house. The smell never left. Weeks later, I can still catch it, faint but sharp every time I wash my hands. Sometimes I hear the faint creak of hinges, the soft scrape of stall doors moving, though I'm alone. I don't use public restrooms anymore. I don't dare. But I know someday I'll open a door and it won't be mine, it won't be safe. It'll be clean, perfect, immaculate, and the smell will be waiting, heavy and metallic, rising from the drain. And whatever waits down there will be closer than ever. The rest stops at halfway between nowhere and nothing. A concrete square with its paint sun-faded to the color of bone, and its vending machines buzzing like insects in the corner. Drivers only ever pulled in when fatigue made the highway stretch too long, or when gas stations were too many miles away. The woman, a tourist with a California plate on her hatchback, had been on the road for 10 hours already. She wanted nothing more than to splash her face, use the restroom, and buy a soda before pressing east into the vast Texas dark. It was late afternoon, the sun sinking low and harsh, flattening the sky into a searing sheet of orange, and the lot was empty except for her car and a pickup truck whose owner was nowhere in sight. Inside, the place had the stale smell of closed-up spaces, as though no window had been opened in years. The bathroom tiles were cracked, graffiti old and half scrubbed away, the corners damp with things better not inspected. But when she stepped into the main hallway that led to the restrooms, she stopped short at the bulletin board on the wall. It was the usual clutter, a few sun-bleached flyers about missing pets from years ago, business cards for long-dead repair shops, and a laminated warning from the county sheriff about rattlesnakes in the summer months. But her eyes froze on a sheet of paper tacked near the center. It was a printout, the kind you'd expect from a standard office printer with a security camera still in the middle. It was her face. Her hair tied back, her car visible behind her. The timestamp at the bottom corner read that morning, just 3 hours earlier. She pulled the sheet from the board and stared at it, her stomach folding in on itself. The cameras mounted outside were gray, dusty, their wires dangling, clearly unused for years. She had noticed them when she pulled in, little dead eyes set into rusting brackets. Yet here was her face, caught mid-step as she had locked her car door. The image was crisp, not grainy, not old. The moment it captured hadn't happened until today. She glanced back toward the entrance, expecting to see someone watching. But the door was still open to the hot evening, and the lot was empty. Clutching the printout, she walked deeper inside, calling out once, then twice. Her voice bounced back to her with no answer. The vending machines stood humming, their glass fronts reflecting her pale, nervous face. The lights overhead flickered, not with the steady buzz of failing bulbs, but in slow, irregular patterns like someone at a breaker box was playing games with the switches. She thought of leaving right then. She should have left, but her nerves told her to check to find an explanation. She followed the hallway to a door marked maintenance, the wood swollen from years of humidity. She tugged on the handle, surprised when it opened. Inside was a room small enough to make her stoop. Dust-blanketed shelves stacked with cleaning supplies, boxes of toilet paper, and 2 metal file cabinets. Against the far wall stood a desk, and on it a monitor flickered faintly, powered by a generator humming in the corner. The monitor showed 4 black and white feeds of the lot, clear as daylight. One was trained directly on her car. The feed froze, then jumped forward, showing her image walking toward the entrance just as she had done earlier. The exact angle matched the printout she held. She staggered back, her chest tightening. Someone had to be there. Someone was recording. She leaned closer, scanning the feed, but there was no watermark, no indication of recording, just live footage unblinking. The sound of the vending machine stopped. The silence was total, so heavy it pressed on her ears. She turned, listening. A faint scrape came from the restroom area like shoes on tile. She called out again, louder this time, trying to force anger into her voice, but it cracked thin in the stale air. No answer. She hurried back to the hallway, heart pounding. The restroom door creaked slowly open, though she had not touched it. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed faintly. She caught a glimpse in the mirror beyond the doorframe, but it wasn't her reflection. The figure was her size, her build, wearing her jacket, but its face was blurred, like someone had taken a finger and smeared across wet paint. She froze. The reflection tilted its head, not matching her own. She dropped the printout. It fluttered to the floor, the timestamp glaring at her from the corner. She backed away, but every step seemed to pull her deeper into the hallway rather than out toward the exit. When she finally spun around, the main door was gone. The wall stretched on where it should have been. She pressed her hands against it, feeling the concrete cold beneath the flaking paint. A new sound rose from behind her, the whir of a printer. Slow, deliberate, she turned, her throat dry. In the maintenance room, the machine was spitting out another sheet. She crept closer, unable to stop herself. The page slid out inch by inch, black ink staining the white. It was another still frame. This one showed her in the hallway, the printout in her hand, terror etched on her face. The timestamp read 1 minute ago. The screen above the printer changed again, the live feed showing her back, her head bent toward the printer. And then, in the corner of the feed, a shadow stepped into frame. Not hers, not shaped like any person she knew, too tall, its arms hanging too long, its face again smeared into obscurity. As if reality itself couldn't hold it in focus. She ran then, sprinting through the building, her shoes squealing on tile. Doors that had once led to restrooms or storage now opened into dead-end hallways, looping back on themselves. The vending machines reappeared twice, their contents rearranged each time, labels upside down or written in languages she couldn't read. Her car appeared on the monitor screens no matter which hallway she stumbled into. The pickup truck outside was gone. She reached a door at last, one that seemed like the exit, glass panels showing the highway beyond. Relief shot through her chest. She shoved it open, stumbling into the twilight. The sky was darker now, bruised purple, the horizon swallowing the sun. She raced to her car, yanking open the door and throwing herself behind the wheel. The keys shook in her hand as she jammed them into the ignition. Before she could start it, she saw another sheet of paper taped to her windshield. She ripped it free with trembling fingers. It was another printout, the latest in the chain. It showed her in the driver's seat, her face frozen mid-panic, looking down at a sheet of paper. The timestamp was not from earlier, not from minutes ago. It was marked tomorrow. The engine wouldn't turn over. The lot was empty, the rest stopped silent. And in the rearview mirror, something blurred and too tall leaned closer to the back seat. The storm had been rolling across central Texas all afternoon, the kind that swallowed up the horizon with sheets of rain and rattled the windows of every gas station and diner along the two-lane highways. I had pulled off at one of those half-dead rest stops you find tucked against the interstate, the kind with a single vending machine humming in a corner, and a flickering fluorescent light that made the shadows crawl up the walls. My car, a faded red Toyota with over 200,000 miles, was parked under the one functioning light pole, though the rain was coming in sideways hard enough that the glow barely touched the asphalt. I told myself I'd wait out the worst of it, maybe stretch my legs inside the shelter of the overhang, maybe even doze for a bit. I didn't want to keep driving blind through that torrent. The storm roared around me, thunder cracking like gunshots just overhead. But in the middle of all that noise came something small and distinct. A payphone bolted against the concrete wall began to ring. The sound was out of place, sharp, insistent. I hadn't seen a working payphone in years. My first instinct was to ignore it. Phones didn't just ring out here, not anymore. Not unless some kid was playing a joke or there was some maintenance worker testing the line. But it kept ringing. A hollow metallic clang over and over, echoing under the roof of the rest stop. I don't know why I answered it. Maybe because I was bored. Maybe because I was curious. Maybe because the sound dug into my nerves and made it impossible to just stand there. I picked up the heavy black receiver, cold in my hand, and held it to my ear. At first there was nothing but static, a low rushing sound that made me think of the storm outside. But then a voice slipped through, whispering my full name. Not just my first name. Not just some misdialed syllable, but the entire thing, first and last, in a tone so soft it barely rode the static. Before I could speak, before I could even ask how they knew who I was, the voice whispered again. "Don't leave. He's outside." A crack of lightning lit up the lot so bright it seared the world white, and in that split-second glare I saw a figure standing behind my car. A tall silhouette, motionless, just far enough away that the storm blurred the details, but close enough that I knew he wasn't some trick of the rain. When the light faded, he was still there, half swallowed by shadow, watching. I pressed back against the wall, the phone receiver clamped to my ear, heart hammering. "Who is this?" I whispered, my own voice trembling. The line hissed, then clicked and went dead. I set the phone back on its cradle with shaking hands, straining my eyes into the dark where the figure had been. A bolt of lightning flashed again, and he was gone. I should have run. Any rational man would have climbed into his car, storm or no storm, and floored it down the highway until the gas light came on. But the words echoed in my head, "Don't leave." And the fact that the voice had known my name dug its claws in. Instead of moving toward the car, I pressed myself deeper under the overhang, closer to the vending machine's faint glow, as though that thin light could keep me safe. The rain didn't let up. It hammered the roof and smeared the world beyond into shifting curtains of black and gray. The lightning strobed the lot again and again, and each time I thought I caught a glimpse of someone standing closer, as if the storm itself was shuffling pieces of him around when I blinked. By the fourth flash, I was certain. He was nearer, no more than 20 feet from the overhang, and I could see the glisten of wet fabric clinging to him. I couldn't see his face. His head was tilted down, but I could feel the weight of his attention pressing on me. I grabbed at the vending machine like it was a shield, my breath fogging in the cold air, and tried to convince myself this was a trick of exhaustion, a tired brain seeing things in the storm. But then, faint and unmistakable, the payphone rang again. The shrill sound cut through the thunder, urgent, almost angry. I forced myself to lift the receiver once more. The same static filled my ear, but this time the whisper came quicker, more urgent. "Don't look at him. Don't move. He'll come if you do." My knees shook so hard I thought they'd give out. I kept my eyes on the vending machine, on the peeling sticker that warned against tipping it over. I counted heartbeats. I listened to the storm pound on. But curiosity has always been my undoing. Against every instinct, against the voice on the line, I turned my head just slightly, enough to catch a glimpse. He was there, right at the edge of the light now. The storm had peeled away enough to show a man's outline, tall and broad-shouldered, with clothes hanging heavy from the rain. His skin, or what I thought was skin, was pale, slick, like something waterlogged. His face was all wrong, slack in places, as if it had been carved and then left to sag. And even though his eyes were downturned, I felt the certainty he was smiling. The phone slipped from my hand and smacked against the wall, swinging on its cord. I backed up until I hit concrete, nowhere else to go. Another flash of lightning and he was gone again, swallowed whole by the dark. This time, though, I knew he hadn't gone far. The lot felt empty and yet more crowded than it should. The way a room feels after someone sneaks in and hides behind the furniture. I don't remember deciding to move, but I ran. I ran for the car, shoes splashing through puddles, fumbling for my keys. I yanked the door open and slammed it shut, locking it with trembling fingers. My breath fogged the windshield. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine coughed once, twice, and died. I tried again, my heart banging in my chest so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. The engine refused to catch, only whining, mocking me. The lightning split the sky again, and in that flare I saw him, standing inches from the driver's side door, his face pressed against the glass, water streaming down his cheeks as if he were weeping. But his mouth, too wide, too slack, was stretched into a grin. The thunder rolled. The car shuddered. The lights in the lot blinked out, leaving only the black maw of the storm. I don't know if I screamed or if the sound I heard was the wind tearing through the world, but when I dared to blink again, the glass was empty. The man gone. My hand shook on the key, twisting it again and again until at last the car roared alive. I threw it into gear, tires spinning on the slick pavement, and shot back onto the highway, water spraying in every direction. I didn't stop driving until dawn lit the horizon pale and gray. Even then, I only pulled off when the tank was near empty. I sat there in the silence of the morning, staring at the empty lot of another rest stop, trying to convince myself that what I saw was nothing but a storm-addled hallucination. But when I stepped out, stretching my stiff legs, I heard it again, a faint metallic clang, a payphone ringing where none stood, and a whisper threading through the air as soft as the rain. "Don't leave. He's outside." And when I turned back to my car, There were wet footprints leading to the driver's door. The highway was nearly empty when Jack pulled off at the faded blue sign promising a rest stop 5 miles ahead. He had been driving since Dallas, pushing west through the dark flatlands of Texas, where the land rolled out like a black ocean, and the wind carried a dry whisper that rattled the weeds along the road. His eyes burned from staring at the painted lines. A cold soda and a stretch sounded like salvation. The place came into view under a yellowed glow of floodlights, the kind that seemed to buzz even if you couldn't hear them, throwing their light against old picnic tables, trash bins, and a bathroom block. He slowed and rolled in, gravel crunching under his tires. It was past midnight, but the lot wasn't empty. An older Ford sat near the far end, its chrome grille catching the light, but nobody was inside. The sight gave him a prickle, but he parked near the vending machines and climbed out. The air was cooler than the cab of his car, laced with dust and something faintly metallic like old water pipes. That's when he saw him. A man in a crisp blue uniform stood by the vending machines, posture straight as if he were waiting. The uniform wasn't security, wasn't police. It looked like the old-style service uniforms from the 70s, neat shirt with a patch on the pocket and pressed trousers. His hair was dark, combed back, and he wore a friendly smile that didn't quite touch his eyes. Jack hesitated, then nodded. The man returned the nod and spoke in a steady, calm voice. "Need some directions?" he asked, as if he'd been expecting Jack all along. Jack admitted he was headed toward Abilene but wasn't sure about the cutoff after Cisco. The man stepped closer, his shoes making no sound against the concrete, and pointed down the black highway beyond the lot. "Stay on this road about 20 miles, you'll see the exit. Don't miss it. Folks who do sometimes don't come back the same." Jack laughed nervously, thinking it was just small-town humor, but the man didn't smile. Instead, he turned, pressed a button on the soda machine, and held out a can of Dr. Pepper. "On the house," he said. Jack took it, the aluminum cold against his palm, and thanked him. He turned back toward his car, popped the can, and when he glanced back, the man was gone. Vanished. No footsteps, no sound, no fading figure across the lot. Just empty concrete and the silent bathrooms, their doors hanging slightly open. Jack's throat tightened as he scanned the shadows. The Ford was still there, gleaming faintly. A chill crawled down his arms. He walked back to the car faster than he meant to, soda trembling in his grip, and slid inside. The can hissed as he opened it, and the sweet fizz filled the car. That was when he noticed the date stamped near the tab. September 1993. He dropped it, soda spilling across the seat, and gunned the engine. The rest stoplights seemed dimmer as he pulled out, like they were flickering out as soon as he left. He kept the wheel tight in his grip, trying to steady his breathing until he found the exit and barreled toward Abilene. Later, at a gas station where a sleepy attendant rang up his coffee, Jack mentioned the uniformed man at the rest stop. The attendant stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "Son, that place hasn't had employees in 20 years. They shut it down after, well..." He trailed off, then leaned in, lowering his voice. "There was a man worked there back then. Wore a blue uniform, always neat. Helped travelers at night, until one didn't make it home. Folks said he gave directions to a road that wasn't there. His car was found stripped and burned in the brush. They never found the driver." Jack wanted to laugh it off, but his mouth was too dry. The attendant slid his change across the counter and added, almost as an afterthought, "You ought to throw that soda away if you still got it. They say it never goes flat. Folks who drink it, sometimes they don't come back the same either." Jack didn't sleep that night, not in the motel bed with the curtains drawn tight, not even with the TV droning. He kept picturing the man's neat smile, the way he vanished, and the old Ford sitting in the lot waiting. When he closed his eyes, he swore he heard the faint fizz of a can opening in the dark, long after the soda had spilled out on his seat. The stretch of I-35 that cuts through central Texas has its fair share of legends, but none are whispered with more conviction than the one about Rest Area 34. It sits lonely and unremarkable between Waco and Austin, tucked behind a row of cedar trees that turn the air sharp and resinous in summer, and in winter seem to exhale something colder than the season itself. Truckers call it cursed. Locals say after 2 in the morning it becomes something else entirely. A place that doesn't obey the same rules of time and distance as the rest of the highway. They'll tell you if you fall asleep there, your rig will be found idling miles away. Your logbook 3 hours short. Your body shaky and cold as though you'd been somewhere else. Most laugh it off. A campfire tale to keep greenhorns awake on long hauls. But enough drivers have admitted to losing those hours that even the most skeptical avoid Rest Area 34 after dark. Eddie Mullins wasn't much for ghost stories. At 47, he'd been hauling freight up and down the state for 2 decades. A big-shouldered man with calloused hands, divorced, too many Marlboros in his chest and a weary cynicism in his eyes. He had a load of auto parts bound for San Antonio, and he was behind schedule after a blowout near Temple. By the time he cleared the repair shop and got back on the southbound lanes, it was close to 1:30 in the morning. His eyelids felt like sandbags. He told himself he'd make it to the Buc-ee's in New Braunfels, maybe nap there. But the road shimmered in his headlights, his vision narrowing, that dangerous gray blur of fatigue creeping in. When the blue highway sign announced Rest Area 34 1 mile, his hands turned the wheel before his better judgment could catch up. The lot was nearly empty. A battered Honda Civic with foggy windows sat under a flickering light, and a single 18-wheeler was parked nose in at the far end, its hazard lights ticking like a metronome. Eddie pulled into a slot near the restroom building, killed his engine and listened as the silence rushed in. It was thicker here than on other stops, as if the surrounding trees had soaked up the hum of the highway. Even the crickets seemed to have shut up. He checked the clock, 1:57, just a quick nap, he told himself. 20 minutes. He leaned back, shut his eyes, and drifted. When he woke, his rig was running. The dash clock glowed 5:11 a.m. The lot outside the windshield wasn't the same one he'd parked in. The cedar trees were gone, replaced by a low chain-link fence and a concrete picnic table tagged with graffiti. He recognized it after a moment. The rest stopped near Luling, more than 60 miles down the interstate. His stomach turned cold. He hadn't started the truck. He hadn't driven a mile, and yet the odometer showed the distance exactly. His hands trembled as he reached for his thermos, finding it empty, though he swore he'd left it half full. His logbook was still open on the passenger seat, his pen lying across it, the last entry ending at 1:57 with no follow-up. The paper smelled faintly metallic, like pennies. For the next 100 miles, Eddie told himself he'd dreamed it. Maybe he had sleepwalked through it, started the truck on autopilot and blacked out. He'd heard of drivers doing worse, but when he checked his phone later that morning at a truck stop, he found 3 calls placed from his number between 2 and 5, each one lasting precisely 66 seconds. The call history said they were to his own voicemail, but when he tried to play them, the recordings were empty, save for a faint hiss that sounded like wind rushing through a tunnel. He didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe him? But the next week he found himself passing Rest Area 34 again, this time northbound with a refrigerated load. It was just after midnight, and though he promised himself he'd keep driving, his eyes slid toward that row of cedar trees. The lot looked deserted, but he thought he saw a pale smear of movement between the restroom building and the tree line. Not a person exactly, more like the shape a person might leave if they stood too long in one place, as though the air itself had worn thin. His hands tightened on the wheel and he accelerated, refusing to check the mirror. Others weren't so lucky. He began noticing things when he talked with other drivers. A guy in Fort Worth swore he'd parked there and woken up on the shoulder of the highway with his trailer unhitched, the kingpin still locked. A woman who ran produce runs claimed she'd lost an entire pallet of lettuce after stopping there, her reefer unit humming empty, as if the load had been lifted out in seconds. One man, pale and jittery, told Eddie he'd woken in Rest Area 34's men's room, staring at his own reflection, only it wasn't moving in sync with him. When he blinked, it kept its eyes open. When he finally stumbled back to his truck, his watch was 3 hours ahead. The thing that kept Eddie awake at night wasn't the lost time. It was what filled it. Because sometimes in the liminal space between waking and sleep, he'd see flashes, a tunnel of cedar trunks stretching endlessly, their branches forming an arch that pressed down until he could barely breathe. Figures standing along the path, too still to be human, their eyes not reflecting light but swallowing it. And always the sound of tires on gravel approaching from behind, though when he turned there was nothing. He'd jolt awake drenched in sweat, the smell of resin in his nose, the memory of hands, not his, resting on his steering wheel. By fall he was jumpy on every route. He caught himself checking mile markers, making sure he bypassed that cursed stop, even if it meant pushing his body beyond safe limits. One rainy night, stuck in traffic south of Waco, He saw brake lights flaring ahead and realized the lane was funneling toward the Rest Area 34 exit. He tried to signal over, but no one let him through, and by the time he slowed, the only open path was into the lot. His pulse thundered. The rain hissed on the windshield as he rolled under the flickering lights. The lot was empty, completely. Not a single car, not a single rig. The restroom building stood dark. His headlights picked out the wet shimmer of the asphalt and the cedar trunks shivering in the wind. He sat there with his hands clamped to the wheel, too afraid to kill the engine, too afraid to move. And then the passenger door unlocked with a click. He hadn't touched it. The dome light flickered on, casting a weak glow over the cab. The seat beside him creaked as though weight had settled there, though the leather was empty. His throat closed. He slammed the truck into gear and roared back onto the highway, nearly sideswiping a sedan as he fled south. But even at 70 miles an hour, he swore he could still hear the sound of shallow breathing just over his right shoulder. The last time anyone saw Eddie Mullins was 2 weeks later. His truck was found neatly parked at Rest Area 34, the engine idling, hazard lights ticking. His logbook ended at 1:58 a.m. The cab was empty. The driver's door was locked from the inside. Search crews combed the cedars, but no footprints marked the wet earth. No scent dogs picked up a trail. They say the truck stayed idling for 3 hours before finally sputtering out, as though it had been waiting for something. Some drivers whisper that if you listen to the wind when you pass Rest Area 34, you can hear Eddie's voice. Not screaming, but reciting, over and over, a log entry with no end. Others claim to have seen a big-shouldered man standing by the tree line, lifting a hand as if to flag them down, only for him to vanish in the rearview mirror. Still, every night rigs hurtle southbound past the exit, their drivers gripping the wheel a little tighter, their eyes locked straight ahead, doing everything in their power not to look at Rest Area 34, because they know if they do, if they slow, if they dare to stop after 2 a.m., the highway may not give them back. The first time it happened, old man Purcell swore he'd seen a little girl in a yellow dress, twirling in the tree line behind his property. It was late March, the kind of evening when the air carried a damp chill and the sun bled itself out slow over the horizon, turning the pine needles to rusty needles of light. He told his son about it, told him he had hollered at the girl to get on home before the coyotes took an interest. But the girl didn't look at him. She only giggled, a light, airy laugh that carried farther than it should have, and then darted back into the woods with a speed that made his throat tighten. He said it wasn't right how fast she moved. Said no child ran like that. No child bent and dipped around the trees without making a sound. The woods behind Purcell's place had been thick since anyone could remember, a stretch of dark loblolly pine and oak that ran for miles, cutting through county lines and swallowing up farmland where it could. Kids at the high school told stories about those woods, stories about lights that burned blue between the trunks, about deer with too many legs, about voices calling their names in the dark. But none of them mentioned a child in a yellow dress until Purcell said what he saw. After that, it became a whisper on the lips of every gas station clerk, every churchgoer, every drunk at the tavern outside town. By summer, 3 people had gone missing near those woods. First was Robbie Dale, 17, quarterback full of himself in the way small-town heroes are. He and his buddies had been drinking by the lake that butted up against the forest. His friends swore he pointed into the tree line and laughed, saying, "What the hell's that kid doing out here?" They claimed they heard giggling, soft and playful, like it belonged to a toddler hiding behind a closet door. Robbie pushed off the tailgate of his truck and jogged toward the trees. They said he was grinning, hollering for the kid to come back before the boogeyman got him. His friends followed for a few steps, then stopped when Robbie vanished between the trunks. They heard him shout once, then again, fainter, and then nothing. When the sheriff's men came with dogs, they found no tracks, no blood, no torn clothing. The ground was soft with pine straw, but it was undisturbed, as though Robbie had never stepped foot there. The second was a woman named Clara May, 39, who worked nights at the Dollar General. She cut across the dirt road behind Purcell's to get home faster. Her neighbor said he saw her walking at dusk, saw her turn her head as though she'd heard someone call to her. He swore she bent down like talking to a child. Then she straightened up, stepped toward the trees, and disappeared into the dark. The third was a boy of 9, Luke Benton, who had wandered off from his uncle's fishing trip near the lake. The uncle said he'd turned his back only a minute to untangle a line, and when he looked up, Luke was gone. What chilled him, he said, was the echo of laughter weaving through the trees. Laughter that wasn't his nephew's. By then, the sheriff had strung up tape, posted warnings, told people to keep clear of the woods at night. Folks obeyed for the most part, but in every town like ours, there are always those who want to test the dark, who want to prod it with a stick and see what it does. That was how I came to be out there myself. I was 35 that year, working nights at the mill, and I'd grown up with stories about these woods. My dad used to say the trees remembered every drop of blood spilled in them, and that memory made them hungry. I thought it was nonsense. I thought everything was nonsense until I saw her. It was August, the air heavy as wet wool, and I was driving the back road near Purcell's heading home. The light was low, that ugly orange sinking into purple. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye and slowed, and there she was standing just inside the line of trees. A child, maybe 8, in a yellow dress, her hair hanging in tangled curls. She was swaying side to side, head tilted as if listening to music only she could hear. My heart started hammering. I pulled over, rolled the window down, and called to her. She stopped swaying and her head turned toward me. I couldn't see her face clearly, it was shadowed, but I saw her smile. Not by her mouth, but the way her cheeks lifted, the faint glint of teeth. She giggled. It was high-pitched, sharp like glass tapping against glass. Then she bolted into the woods. I don't know what came over me, but I cut the engine, shoved the door open, and went after her. The air inside the woods was instantly cooler, the kind of chill that clung to your skin. The pines crowded tight overhead, muting the dying light. I could still hear her laughter. Always just ahead, never closer, never farther. My boots crunched over leaves and snapped twigs, but her footsteps were silent. My breath turned ragged, the sweat sticking to my shirt, and every now and then I swore I glimpsed the flash of yellow between the trunks. Then something shifted. The woods went quiet. The laughter stopped. I froze, my ears straining, my body taut as a wire. The silence was thick, unnatural. Then I heard it. A whisper. My name, not shouted, not called, whispered, as if someone's lips brushed the shell of my ear. I spun, but there was nothing. Just rows of trees receding into blackness. My pulse was a drum in my throat. I called out, my own voice shaking, bouncing off the trunks in strange, uneven echoes. Then I saw her. She was closer this time, standing maybe 20 feet away, her small frame pale in the last scraps of light. Her face was clearer now, and God help me, it wasn't right. Her eyes were too large, swallowing her face black as tar. Her mouth stretched wider than it should, the smile splitting her cheeks unnaturally. When she giggled again, the sound came from behind me, though her lips moved where she stood. I took a step back. The ground seemed to shift beneath me, as though it wanted to give way. I turned, ready to run, but the trees had changed. They pressed closer, twisting in angles that didn't exist before. The path I had come from was gone. And then she moved. Not ran. Moved. 1 second she was 20 feet away. The next she was inches from me, her face tilted up, her black eyes reflecting nothing. She smelled like wet earth and rot. Her hand brushed my arm and it was cold, the kind of cold that sinks into the bone. The last thing I remember is the sound of her giggle, sharp and ringing, as everything went dark. When I woke, it was morning. I was lying at the edge of the woods near Purcell's fence line. My truck was still parked on the road, the door hanging open. My shirt was torn and there were scratches down my arms, deep enough to bleed. The sheriff was there, squinting at me like I was drunk. He asked me what the hell I thought I was doing out there. I told him. I told him about the child. He didn't say a word, just looked at me with something like pity, then told me to get gone and never step foot near those trees again. That was 3 years ago. I've kept my distance since, though I hear the story still. More people gone missing, more whispers of a child in a yellow dress. And some nights when the wind's just right, I swear I hear her laughter slipping through the branches outside my window. I never chased it again. But I know one day, it'll come looking for me. The rain had just started when Jack pulled his Dodge off I-20 and into a dimly lit rest stop outside Abilene. It was the kind of Texas night where the sky seemed to press down on the earth, a low ceiling of bruised clouds occasionally torn open by white veins of lightning. He had been driving since Dallas, his eyes tired, the hum of the highway still buzzing in his head as he cut the engine and let the silence settle around him. There was only one other vehicle in the lot, a beat-up Oldsmobile with weeds growing through the cracks beneath its tires, the kind of car that looked like it hadn't moved in years. He figured it had been abandoned. The vending machines flickered by the restroom building, one bulb out, another blinking like a bad signal. Jack stretched, lit a cigarette, and was just about to climb back into the truck when he noticed a man standing in the shadows near the picnic tables. The stranger was tall, dressed in a denim jacket that looked soaked through, his hair plastered against his head as if he'd been walking through the storm for miles. Jack hesitated, then nodded politely. The man stepped forward with a strange calmness, his boots making no sound on the wet pavement. He raised a hand and asked in a low voice if Jack was headed west. Jack was tired, too tired to argue with fate, and against his better judgment he gestured to the passenger seat. The hitchhiker climbed in without another word, dripping rainwater onto the cracked vinyl, the smell of wet earth and something metallic filling the cab. They drove in silence at first, the windshield wipers smearing water across the glass in rhythmic slaps. Jack introduced himself, but the man gave no name, only a faint smile that didn't touch his eyes. His face was pale, his skin almost waxy in the glow of the dashboard. He looked young, maybe 30, though there was something old in his expression, something that made Jack uneasy. Jack tried to break the silence, asking where he was headed, if he had family nearby, but the hitchhiker answered in vague phrases that went nowhere. Mostly, he just stared out the side window, watching the black fields roll by under the lightning. It was when Jack checked the rearview mirror that the first tremor of real fear slipped into him. In the glass, he saw the empty passenger seat, just empty vinyl shining under the dome light. He blinked, thinking it was the rain distorting things, and looked again. Still empty, yet he could feel the weight of the man beside him, hear the soft rasp of his breathing. Jack's hand tightened on the wheel until his knuckles whitened. He dared not mention it, afraid that speaking would make it real. The storm outside seemed to grow heavier, wind pushing against the truck, lightning flashing across the horizon in stuttering bursts. The miles dragged on and the presence beside him became unbearable. Jack's mouth was dry, his heartbeat too loud. He glanced sideways once, just once, and saw the hitchhiker staring at him with those pale, depthless eyes. The corners of the man's mouth curled upward, but not in kindness. It was as if he knew what Jack had seen, knew he wasn't reflected in the mirror, and was waiting for him to admit it. Jack's throat closed up. He turned back to the road, willing himself to focus on the yellow lines glowing faintly under the rain. At some point, the hitchhiker spoke again, his voice quiet but carrying over the storm. He asked Jack if he'd ever hit anyone on the road, if he'd ever felt the sickening thud of a body under his wheels. Jack stammered no, never, but the hitchhiker only nodded slowly as if he didn't believe him. Then he began to tell a story, his words deliberate, measured. He said he'd been walking that highway for a long time, longer than Jack could imagine. He described the screech of tires, the crack of bones, the way headlights cut through the night just before the impact. Jack's chest tightened. He gripped the wheel until his fingers went numb, shaking his head, insisting he didn't want to hear any more. But the hitchhiker kept talking, describing in grotesque detail how it felt to be dragged across the asphalt, how skin peeled away, how the air left his lungs in one final gasp. Jack shouted at him to stop, his voice cracking, but the man only chuckled, the sound hollow and wet. Lightning illuminated his face for a brief instant, and Jack swore he saw it split open, raw flesh showing beneath, eyes clouded with death. He turned back to the road, panting, praying it was just exhaustion playing tricks on him. But when he looked again in the rearview mirror, the seat was still empty. His stomach dropped. The highway stretched on endlessly, black ribbon cutting through darker fields. Jack's thoughts spiraled, fragments of memory bubbling up unbidden. He remembered a night years ago, driving back from a bar on this same stretch of road, headlights blurred from whiskey, a figure stepping out too late to escape. He remembered the bump, the scream swallowed by the wind, the way he never stopped. He had buried that night deep, convinced himself it was nothing but a dream, but the hitchhiker's words had ripped it free. His hands trembled on the wheel, the weight of guilt pressing down harder than the storm. He tried to pull over, tried to push the brake, but the pedal sank uselessly to the floor. The truck kept moving, faster and faster, as though some invisible force had taken the wheel. The hitchhiker leaned closer, his voice in Jack's ear now, whispering that it was time to see what it felt like, time to understand. Jack screamed at him to get out, But there was no door opening, no relief. Only the reflection in the glass, the absence where the man should be. The headlights revealed a figure ahead, standing in the middle of the road. Jack recognized the same pale face, the same waxy skin, staring into the beams without flinching. He jerked the wheel, but the truck didn't obey. The impact came with a deafening crack, the windshield spiderwebbing, blood smearing across the glass, though Jack knew there had been no way to avoid it. He felt the sickening roll of tires over flesh, the shudder of the frame as something broke beneath them. His scream tore out of him, high and ragged, filling the cab. When the truck finally skidded to a halt on the shoulder, the rain had gone silent. Jack sat there trembling, his chest heaving, hands gripping the useless wheel. The passenger seat was empty, yet the air smelled of iron and wet earth. He forced himself to look in the rearview mirror, hoping to see nothing, hoping it was all madness. Instead, the hitchhiker's face filled the glass, pale and grinning, though the seat beside him remained bare. The eyes locked on Jack's, cold and endless, and the mouth moved though no sound came. Jack felt his body freeze, unable to breathe, unable to scream as the reflection leaned closer and closer, until the mirror went black. By morning, the truck was found idling on the side of the highway, driver's seat empty, windshield cracked. The police marked it down as an accident, a missing person case to be buried among many. But truckers passing that stretch of I-20 still say if you stop at the rest area on a stormy night, you'll see a man waiting by the picnic tables, silent and soaked through, and if you give him a ride, you'll never see your reflection the same way again. The picnic area off the highway was nothing special, just a scattering of wooden tables beneath tired oaks that had survived more droughts than they had branches left to show. The place was nearly always empty, which was exactly why Mark liked to stop there on his long drives between Austin and Houston. He wasn't the kind of man who sought company on the road. He liked the quiet, the hum of cicadas rising and falling like waves on the Texas heat, the comfort of his coffee thermos and the wind ruffling through the leaves. On this particular afternoon, the air felt oddly heavy, as though it had been waiting for him, and when he stepped out of his truck, he noticed the table nearest the trees. The one sitting just a little off-kilter seemed to echo faintly when he set his thermos down. It wasn't much at first, just the sound of hollow wood, but it nagged at him. The top planks were sun-bleached and scarred with carvings of initials, but when he rapped his knuckles against them, the sound carried as though there was a cavity beneath. He crouched and slid his hand along the underside where splinters caught at his skin. That's when he felt it, the edge of a recessed square, a seam in the wood that didn't match the rest of the table. He pressed harder and one corner gave slightly, almost imperceptibly. Curiosity had always been his flaw, the thing his ex-wife used to mock. He pried at the seam with the edge of his key, and with a groan of long, unused hinges, a trapdoor lifted, releasing a stale draft that smelled faintly of earth, rust, and something sour. Mark froze. Beneath the table, hidden where no one would think to look, was a dark opening leading straight down. He told himself it was some maintenance hatch, maybe drainage for the park, but when he pulled out his phone and shone the light, the beam caught the edge of paper. Dozens of them. Newspapers stacked and yellowing, the ink bled and curling. He climbed down, feet on the wooden rungs nailed into the side, heart quickening at every creak. The space was larger than he expected, a chamber cut into the earth like some forgotten root cellar. The newspapers were real, piled high against the walls, brittle with time. He picked one up and squinted in the dim light. The headline screamed about a missing family from 1998, last seen traveling I-10. Another paper showed a smiling couple with their newborn, vanished without a trace in 2003. He shuffled through a dozen more, each reporting disappearances from the highway, stretching back decades. The pit in his stomach deepened. Then his light swept to the far wall and he nearly dropped his phone. Rows of driver's licenses were nailed there, pinned like hunting trophies. Texas plates mostly, though he caught glimpses of Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas. Faces stared back at him, some sun-faded and scratched, others crisp, recent. The nails were driven through the plastic, dead center between the eyes. Mark's breath hitched. He counted unconsciously. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, neatly arranged in grim rows. A sound broke the silence. Faint, but there. The shuffle of dirt, the drag of a boot. He spun, light slicing across the cramped room. Nothing. Just the uneven dirt floor, the stacks of papers, the horror on the wall. He told himself it was his imagination that he'd stirred up a rat. He reached for the ladder, eager to climb out. But when he set his foot on the bottom rung, it shifted oddly, as if someone had just used it from above. He craned his head up and his light caught the trapdoor swinging slightly as though nudged. "Hello?" His voice cracked in the silence. "Park maintenance?" No answer. Just the thump of the trapdoor shutting with a deliberate finality. The chamber dropped into darkness so complete it felt like a hand pressing over his eyes. Mark fumbled with his phone, the screen slippery in his grasp. He turned the flashlight back on, but the beam quivered with his shaking. From somewhere behind the stacked newspapers, he heard breathing, slow, deliberate, dragging in air like someone savoring it. The sound rooted him to the spot. He wanted to scream, to demand who was there, but his throat constricted. He backed toward the ladder, heart hammering, when the stack of papers nearest him toppled forward as though shoved. The smell hit him next, thick and metallic, the stink of rot that had been sealed too long. His light swept across what the papers had hidden. Bones scattered and gnawed, human bones stained dark, piled against the corner like discarded kindling. Mark dropped his phone in shock, the light spinning across the floor until it landed against a shin bone with a dull clack. The chamber plunged back into partial shadow, and in that shifting glow he saw movement, a figure unfolding itself from behind the mound. It was tall, impossibly gaunt, clothes ragged and clinging to its frame, eyes catching the light like an animal's. The mouth hung slack, teeth jagged, gums black. He scrambled up the ladder, hands slipping, legs burning as he pulled himself toward the trapdoor. But when he pressed against it, it wouldn't budge. Something heavy pinned it from above. He shoved harder, fingers straining, the wood groaning against his effort. Behind him, the thing was moving closer, steps slow and certain, breathing louder now, joined by a low rasp that might have been words or simply the scrape of ruined lungs. Mark pounded the wood, screaming for help, the sound muffled by the earth. His fists bled against the splinters. The nails holding the licenses seemed to glint in his peripheral vision, hundreds of dead eyes watching him flail, witnesses to the same fate. The last thing he felt was the sudden grip of hands that were ice-cold and impossibly strong, dragging him back from the ladder into the darkness. His phone blinked once, light catching the wall of faces one final time before it went out, leaving nothing but the sound of the trapdoor above creaking open, then closing again, quietly as if the table had never been disturbed. He had been driving for hours across Texas, following the endless line of highway that cut through scrub and sand like a scar. His eyes burned from fatigue, and the hum of the engine had long ago slipped into something like a lullaby, dangerous in its monotony. When he saw the blue glow of a rest stop sign, he took the exit without hesitation. The place was nearly empty, just a handful of trucks parked in the distance, their cabins dark, their chrome catching the faint shine of a thin desert moon. He parked beneath a dim sodium light that buzzed like a dying insect and stepped out, stretching his legs. The air was dry and cool, the kind of stillness that makes you aware of your own breath. It wasn't until he was standing there sipping water from a plastic bottle that he noticed the lights. Across the two-lane road, maybe a quarter-mile away, stood a gas station he hadn't seen when pulling in. Its neon sign hummed a dull red, the kind of glow that looked old, half-dead, and ready to collapse into darkness at any moment. The window showed faint light, too, as if someone was still inside. He glanced back at his car, debating whether to just rest a while and keep driving, but curiosity got the better of him. Something about the way the gas station's lights seemed to pulse against the horizon made him want to see it up close. The road was silent as he crossed it, his shoes crunching on gravel and grit. Halfway there, he thought he heard something. A faint sound like laughter carried on the wind, though there was no wind and no other living thing in sight. He slowed, listening, but the desert was quiet again. When he reached the edge of the station's cracked asphalt lot, he saw that it was far older than it had looked from across the way. The paint on the pumps had peeled until the metal beneath showed through in rusting streaks. The price signs were frozen decades out of date. A single moth circled the light above the door, frantic and confused as though trapped in some endless orbit. He stepped forward, hand hovering near the glass door. Inside, rows of dusty shelves stood crooked, half empty. The place smelled faintly of gasoline, but underneath it lingered a sour odor, something wet and rotten. He was about to pull the handle when he felt it, that instinctive pressure at the back of the skull, the primal urge to turn back. His heart beat hard, fast, and without reason. He stepped away, deciding suddenly that he didn't need to go inside after all. The lights looked sickly up close, casting everything in an unhealthy glow. When he turned, his chest tightened. The road was still there, stretching into the horizon, but the rest stop was gone. His car, the trucks, the buzzing sodium light. All of it had vanished, swallowed by an endless sweep of desert that ran unbroken in every direction. His throat closed, his breath caught. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, looked again. Nothing, just sand and scrub and the endless reach of the horizon. Panic rose in him, sharp and immediate. He stumbled forward, running toward where the rest stop had been. His shoes sank into loose dirt that hadn't been there before, his legs heavy as though the ground itself wanted to drag him down. He ran until his chest burned, but there was nothing ahead but more of the same. When he turned back, the gas station remained, humming in its half-dead light, watching him from the edge of its cracked lot. It hadn't moved, but it felt closer, as though the desert itself was folding around him, pushing him back toward it. He shouted, then screamed into the emptiness. His voice carried strangely, swallowed too quickly by the night. He pulled his phone from his pocket, but there was no signal, no clock, nothing. Just a black screen that refused to wake, as if the device itself had been gutted. He hurled it into the sand, his chest heaving with terror. The only light in the world came from the gas station, and as much as he wanted to run in any other direction, he felt the gravity of it pulling him back. Step by step, against every instinct in his body, he walked toward the humming neon sign. The closer he came, the more he saw through the glass. The shelves weren't crooked anymore. They were filled, stocked with rows of bright cans and boxes, everything pristine. A man stood behind the counter now, motionless, staring straight ahead. His eyes were wide, too wide, white and wet like an animal caught in a trap. His mouth was open just enough to show the edge of teeth. The buzzing neon light flickered, and for 1 second, the man wasn't behind the counter at all. He was pressed against the glass door, his eyes inches from the traveler's, fog blooming across the glass with each rasping breath. The traveler stumbled back, heart hammering, but the man was gone again, back behind the counter. The door creaked open on its own, the sound long and low, like the groan of something ancient waking from sleep. Inside, the light seemed brighter, warmer, inviting. His fear warred with the suffocating knowledge that there was nowhere else to go. The desert had erased everything but this place. He stepped through the door, the bell above it giving no sound, and the stench of gasoline and rot washed over him, heavier than before, clinging to his skin, filling his lungs. Behind him, the door closed on its own, sealing him in. The man behind the counter smiled then, slow and unnatural, stretching far too wide, splitting the skin at the corners of his mouth. Rows of pristine products on the shelves began to rot in seconds, collapsing into piles of mold and worms. The humming neon outside flickered once more and went out, leaving only the dim light inside. The traveler wanted to scream, but his voice had been stolen. He could only watch as the man behind the counter raised one pale, shaking hand and pointed at him, the smile still growing, the eyes still wide and wet. The sound came then, filling the station, a chorus of voices, hundreds layered over each other, all laughing that same faint laughter he had heard on the road. It came from the shelves, from the floor, from the walls themselves. The traveler stumbled backward, covering his ears, but the sound pressed through his skull into his mind, dragging his thoughts into chaos. He hit the floor, vision blurring, the rotten stench burning his nose. When he looked up, the man was no longer behind the counter. He was crouched above him, face bending down, stretching toward his own. That smile now splitting the face into something inhuman. The last thing the traveler saw before the light blinked out was his own reflection in the man's eyes. Mouth stretched open in a scream he could no longer hear, swallowed whole by the gas station in the middle of the desert where the rest stop used to be. The restroom at the truck stop off Highway 59 had that stale, clinging smell of bleach and old urine, the kind that seemed to seep into the tile itself. It was nearly midnight and the place was empty, except for the faint hum of the soda machine outside and the occasional rumble of a semi pulling in. Alan pushed the door open and let it creak shut behind him, already regretting the gas station burrito that had twisted his stomach into knots. The fluorescent light flickered above him, buzzing faintly, and the mirrors along the wall bore streaks of dried water and faint handprints. The restroom had 3 stalls. Alan slid into the one at the far end, dropped onto the cold seat and rubbed his face with both hands. His stomach churned again. He was still when he first heard it, faint at first like the brushing of fabric or someone dragging their shoes slightly across the floor. A whisper. He froze. At first he thought it was just the sound of air rushing through the vents, but then it came again. Two voices, hushed, urgent, leaning toward each other. They came from the stalls right beside him, though he hadn't seen anyone when he came in. He leaned forward, holding his breath, listening. A man's voice, low and raspy, was whispering quickly, words tumbling one after another. A second voice, softer, higher, interrupted in staccato bursts, almost pleading. The words were muffled, impossible to make out, but the cadence was clear. Conversation. He swallowed hard, the back of his neck prickling. Slowly, he bent down, his knees creaking against the stall wall. He lowered his head until he could see the line of grimy tile and the narrow shadows beneath the stalls. Both were empty. His throat tightened. He jerked upright, listening harder now, but the whispers continued, more insistent, overlapping each other in a sharp, breathless rhythm. Alan forced himself to breathe evenly. His first thought was that someone was playing a prank. Maybe the voices were coming from outside, through a vent echoing strangely inside. He cleared his throat and called out, "Hello?" The whispers stopped instantly. The silence pressed down so thick it felt physical, like the air itself had weight. He could hear the soft hum of the light above him, the trickle of water dripping somewhere in the pipes, and his own pulse thrumming in his ears. Then, just as his breath started to ease, the whispers surged back, louder now, directly in the stalls beside him. This time the voices seemed angry, snarling, one drowning out the other. He heard a guttural hiss that made his skin crawl. He shoved his hand against the stall door, flung it open, and staggered out. The bathroom was empty. The mirrors reflected only himself, pale and shaking. He glanced under each stall again, one by one. Empty. But the voices hadn't stopped. They had grown sharper, shrill, as if whoever spoke was pressing their mouths close to his ears, their hot breath scraping against the edge of his hearing. He stumbled back toward the door, fumbling for the handle, but it wouldn't turn. He yanked again, harder this time. The knob rattled, but the door stayed shut. His heart hammered. He turned back toward the stalls, every instinct screaming to keep his eyes averted, but he couldn't. Something moved behind the gaps in the doors, a fleeting shadow that slipped across all three stalls at once, too fast, too fluid, as though whatever it was had stretched itself thin and dragged its shape from one side to the other. Alan pressed himself against the door, his breath ragged. The whispers rose into a crescendo, overlapping so quickly they sounded like a single voice splitting apart, each syllable clawing into the air. He covered his ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just in the room. It was inside his skull, writhing like worms beneath the skin. He sank to his knees, tears squeezing from his eyes. His mind scrambled for prayer, for reason, but the words dissolved into static. From the stalls, the toilet lids banged shut, one after another. Then all at once, as though unseen hands were slamming them, the mirrors cracked, jagged lines crawling like spiderwebs across the glass. Alan screamed, though the sound was swallowed instantly by the whispers. The bathroom floor rippled under him, the tile stretching like wet paper. The whispers fell silent again. The stillness was worse. His chest heaved, each breath shallow, his body slick with sweat. Then softly, so close it brushed against his eardrum, came one final word, clear this time. "Stay." The lock on the door clicked open by itself. The handle turned slowly, creaking as though an invisible hand was waiting on the other side. Alan didn't move. He couldn't. He sat frozen on the filthy floor, staring at the door as it swung open inch by inch. Cold night air drifted in from the truck stop lot, carrying the smell of diesel, but nothing entered. The bathroom was empty, yet Alan could still hear the voices, not whispered anymore, but breathing, steady and patient in time with his own. They didn't leave when he did. They followed him back to his car, into the driver's seat, down the lonely stretch of highway that cut through the dark Texas plains. When he glanced in the rearview mirror, he thought he saw the backseat ripple as though someone leaned forward, their lips almost brushing his ear, and the whisper began again. The rest stop off Highway 59 looked like it had been forgotten by time. A single flickering streetlight buzzed in the sticky East Texas night, illuminating a cracked parking lot and a concrete bench that faced a row of rusting vending machines. Trucks roared by in the distance, their low hum blending with the sound of cicadas. It was the kind of place most people drove past without a second thought. a pocket of silence where the darkness felt heavier than anywhere else. That night, a hitchhiker sat on the bench, his head tilted back, his hands folded neatly in his lap. From a distance, he looked like he was dozing, just another drifter waiting for a ride that would never come. But up close, his eyelids were sewn shut, the skin raw and puckered as if the stitches were fresh. Derek noticed him first. He had been driving back from a job in Nacogdoches, the back of his pickup full of tools that smelled of oil and metal shavings. The long drive home to Houston had worn him down, and when he spotted the rest stop, he figured he'd stretch his legs, grab a Coke from the vending machine, maybe smoke before the final push. He parked, stepped out, and stretched his arms toward the humid night sky. That's when he saw the hitchhiker. The man's posture was too rigid, too still. Something about the angle of his head bothered Derek, like the guy was listening, straining to hear something just out of reach. As Derek walked past, the truth revealed itself in the pale wash of the streetlight. Stitches crisscrossed the man's eyelids, pulling them taut, the puckered flesh angry and raw. Derek froze, his chest tightening. The hitchhiker's skin was sallow, stretched thin over sharp cheekbones. His lips were parted slightly, and his breath came shallow and wheezy, like someone with a chest full of fluid. Yet he sat upright, waiting. "Hey man, you okay?" Derek asked, his voice cracking against the silence. The hitchhiker didn't respond. His head tilted slightly in Derek's direction, like he could sense him standing there. The wheezing breath hitched once, then steadied. Derek backed away slowly, his hand brushing the keys in his pocket, ready to bolt if he had to. Something about the man's presence was wrong, like the air around him had been drained of warmth. Derek bought a Coke just to do something with his hands. When he glanced back, the hitchhiker was still sitting there, head cocked in that listening way. He thought about calling the cops, but imagined the response. Some poor bastard down on his luck, maybe blind, maybe crazy. They'd shrug it off and Derek would look like an idiot. He cracked the can, took a long sip, and told himself to get back on the road. But as he slid behind the wheel, he couldn't shake the feeling that if he left, something bad would follow him. Against his better judgment, he lingered. The hitchhiker hadn't moved. His stitched eyes seemed to glisten in the light as though wet with fresh blood. Derek thought about the stories his uncle used to tell when he was a kid. About spirits that wandered back roads, hitchhikers who weren't flesh and blood but shadows pulled from darker places. He'd laughed them off then. Now with the night pressing in and the man without eyes sitting so patiently on that bench, the old fear crept back. Finally, Derek called out again, louder this time. "You need help? You want me to call someone?" The hitchhiker's lips twitched and a sound slipped out. Not words, but a low hum, almost like a hymn sung off-key. The sound crawled into Derek's ears and stayed there, vibrating deep in his chest. His Coke can trembled in his hand. He dropped it, soda fizzing across the asphalt. The humming grew louder, steady, and Derek realized it wasn't coming just from the hitchhiker's mouth. It was everywhere, inside the vending machines, in the ground beneath his boots, in the very air he breathed. He staggered back, slapping his hands against his ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside him now. The hitchhiker rose slowly, joints cracking with the effort. He turned his sewn-shut face toward Derek, and though the man had no eyes, Derek swore he felt something staring into him. The hum dropped low, like the rumble of a passing train, and Derek's knees gave out. He fell hard, his palms scraping against the rough pavement. When he looked up, the hitchhiker was standing over him. The stitches on his eyelids split slightly, dark fluid seeping out and dripping down his cheeks. "You see me?" The hitchhiker rasped, voice breaking like dry wood. The words weren't a question. They were a statement, a judgment. "You shouldn't." Derek scrambled backward, his heart pounding. He tried to shout, but his throat locked up. The humming pressed harder, squeezing his skull until black spots danced in his vision. The hitchhiker crouched, the raw, seeping eyelids inches from his face. The smell was overwhelming, copper and rot. "Give them back," the man whispered. "Give them back or I'll take yours." Derek didn't understand, couldn't understand, but his body moved. He scrambled to his truck, fumbling the keys with shaking hands. Behind him, the humming built to a deafening roar, and when he dared a glance in the mirror, the hitchhiker was gone. The bench sat empty under the streetlight. He didn't stop driving until he hit Houston, his nerves frayed to threads. For days afterward, he woke in the night to the faint sound of humming in his ears. He kept telling himself it was nothing, that the man had just been some blind lunatic playing tricks on him. But then the dreams began. In them, he was always at the rest stop, always standing in the flickering light with the stitched man waiting on the bench. And every time the stitches came undone a little more, every time the humming grew louder until it was the only sound in the world. He'd wake soaked in sweat, clutching at his face as if to make sure his own eyes were still there. The final night, Derek woke to the sensation of someone sitting at the foot of his bed. He didn't move, didn't breathe, the humming already alive in his skull. Slowly, against his will, he turned his head. The hitchhiker sat there, hands folded neatly in his lap, his sewn eyelids weeping black down his gaunt face. The stitches tore open as he leaned forward, and where eyes should have been, there was nothing but hollow sockets, raw and wet, pulling Derek into their endless dark. The last thing Derek heard was that humming, swelling and swallowing him whole, as the man without eyes whispered, "Now you see." I was halfway between Austin and Lubbock on a Sunday night in late October, when the caffeine wore off and the radio went to static. The highways in that part of Texas have a way of stripping the world down to headlights and wind noise. No landmarks except the skeletal towers of wind farms and the occasional water tower painted with a mascot, whose team I'd never root for. I pulled off on a rest stop near mile marker 326, a low concrete building with a memorial plaque to some county road commissioner, and a row of decorative mesquite trees that had been hacked into polite shapes. It was close to midnight. The sky had that West Texas blackness that makes you think the world ends just outside the circle of the parking lot lights. The building was clean in that chemically sour way of places mopped often, but never affectionately. Inside, vending machines hummed by the door, and a display case held a map with the words "You are here," and a star that was supposed to be comforting. The star looked like an eye. I remember the smell of iced tea from the dispensers and the way the freezer in the ice cream machine rattled like teeth. I remember the maintenance man's wet floor sign propped beside the men's room door, and a flyer taped up at the far end of the lobby, a black and white printout showing a missing man with tired eyes. The paper corners had curled from the air conditioner. In the bottom corner of the flyer was a date from late September, and a number with a 940 area code. I was thinking about calling my own mom just to hear her voice and deciding not to, because it would wake up my little sister who had school tomorrow. I wanted to stretch, splash water on my face, get back on US 84 before the fog settled in. The men's room door swung on hinges that squeaked out a single protesting note. The floor was tile, bone white with darker flecks, the kind that shows every shoe print. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the long tubes arranged in pairs like bones. I was the only one in there. I remember leaving my backpack on the sink counter. I remember checking the mirror to see if I looked as tired as I felt. The mirrors had that old silvering at the edges, black freckles like mold. My face looked stretched and pale, a stranger's face, my brown hair plastered to my forehead. I washed my hands and stared at the automatic dryer, waiting for the sensor's red eye to blink awake. It took too long. When the air came, it came thin and warm, the kind of breath an old man gives. That was when I saw the hallway. It shouldn't have been there. Past the row of sinks and the last urinal, beyond a maintenance door painted shut with beige enamel, there was a corridor where I knew there'd been only cinder block wall before. I knew because I'd stopped at this rest stop last semester on my way to a debate tournament in Amarillo, and the men's room had been a rectangle, no surprises, no dead ends. Now the corridor stretched away in a clean institutional line, the ceiling lights receding like a runway at night. The floor continued the same tile pattern, as if the building had always had this extra limb. The air coming from it was cooler. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something else that felt like winter. Maybe the AC had kicked on, and a strip of cold had slid out of the ductwork. Maybe I was punchy from too many hours awake. I told myself all of that as I walked toward the new space, my phone in my back pocket and the mirror already showing an empty room because of the angle. I called out without thinking. "A test call, common sense, something like, 'Hello, anyone there?'" My voice bounced back to me and returned thinner. I half expected a janitor with a mop to stick his head out and wave me off, say it was closed for cleaning. No one answered. The hallway's walls were a little darker than the bathrooms, painted a gray that pulls light into itself. The lights embedded in the ceiling panels were spaced evenly, each one a glowing lozenge. They gave the impression of a path that had been set out for me. I took another step and then a third, telling myself I'd go 2 lights in and turn around. 2 lights became 4, then 6. The sound of my sneakers made the same pop of rubber on tile with each step. and the echo fell behind me and then disappeared, as if my footsteps had begun to be swallowed. I kept thinking of how sometimes public buildings have hidden service corridors, how the state might have added something to meet some code. It was easier than thinking about the way the air didn't smell like people had passed through, how untouched it felt. Behind me, there was a click so quiet, I might have imagined it. Then the light nearest the bathroom went out. I froze and turned, the movement too sudden, the nerves in my neck snagging like spider silk. I watched as the second light went dark, then the third, a slow shudder rolling toward me. It wasn't a flicker. It was a deliberate extinguishing, a sequence as if someone were walking with a finger along a row of switches. I started back, of course I did. But the dark was coming fast and the lights ahead of me seemed brighter now, a string drawing me on. My brain split along two lines, one line saying run back, even if it means running through dark, and the other line saying no, that way is closing, move forward where you can still see. I chose badly. I kept going. Quick steps now. A trotting hurry that made heat rise under my jacket and sweat gather along my spine. I told myself it was a motion sensor system, a cost-saving thing, and if I moved fast enough I could outrun the clock. That theory didn't hold because the lights behind me kept snapping off in smooth succession with no pause, like beads sliding off a broken string. The sound of the clicks was getting closer. Every time one died, the silence sharpened. I pulled out my phone and saw the bars flatten to nothing as the Wi-Fi symbol blinked in and out without connecting. I tried the flashlight and it turned on without complaint, a cone of cold light that looked weak beside the fluorescence ahead. The beam skittered over the walls. No signs, no doors, not even a scuff mark or a maintenance sticker. It was like walking inside a digital rendering of a hallway set to default settings. By then I was running, too aware of the pull between me and the lights, the almost playful way the darkness seemed to be keeping pace. There is a point in a long run where your body stops taking orders. I came up against that point all at once. My thighs began to burn as if 100 tiny cramps had lit at once. My lungs scratched at my ribs. I slowed and tried to listen. When I stopped, the corridor became soundless. It was a strange soundlessness, like when snow muffles a town, except there was no softness to it. It was a vacuum. I could hear my own swallowing. I could hear my pulse. I could hear the dryer in the bathroom wind down and stop. That last detail shouldn't have been possible. It was a long way behind me now, yet it was as if sound carried forward in this space while refusing to travel backward. I don't know how long the hallway was by then. The lights ahead kept repeating at regular intervals, but the distance between each felt slippery. I tried to mark distance by counting steps. Every 10 lights I put a hash mark in my head and tried to add them up. After the 5th hash mark, I realized I had lost track of where my count had started. The floor was level. The walls were straight. The ceiling never changed. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. I thought about turning sideways and pressing my back to the wall and letting the darkness catch me there so at least I wouldn't be running when it met me. I thought about lying down because you can sleep through a lot of bad things and wake up on the other side. The idea of closing my eyes in that corridor felt like a suggestion whispered by someone who didn't have my best interests in mind. A noise came from ahead then. A metal clink, faint as a dropped coin. I stood still, listening for its place. It came again, farther, the sound of something metallic swaying and touching a wall. I had a crooked thought that it was a sign on a chain, a restroom placard, a warning swinging on 2 little screws. It seemed reasonable to move toward it. Reasonable became urgent when the next light behind me went out so close that I could feel the absence like a gust. I went forward in a jog that wanted to be a sprint and kept it steady out of pride. I always hated looking foolish, even alone. The clink came again and again, not in a regular pattern, as if the things swinging were caught in a light wind that did not touch me. I did not find a sign. After another long stretch, I found a door. It was the color of a photograph left in the sun too long. A metal door with a push bar and no handle. Above it, an exit sign glowed in the same featureless white as the lights. No red letters, no arrows. The clinking sound had been the chain of the door closer tapping against itself. This meant I wasn't entirely alone. Doors are made for people. I told myself that while I wiped my palm on my jeans and pressed the bar. It resisted and then gave with a sigh like a long-held breath. The door opened onto a second corridor. This one was narrower, and a draft of air moved down it, the faintest flow tugging a strand of my hair across my forehead. The lights behind me kept shutting off in their patient parade. I didn't see a better choice. I stepped through and let the door swing shut behind me. This second hallway had texture. The paint was rougher with little seeds in it you could feel under your fingers. The floor had a more noticeable rise every few tiles, a rhythmic bump that made my step hitch. I walked this one instead of running. It seemed to reward that. The lights slowed their extinguishing as if a pair of hands were more cautious here. I tested the wall with my knuckles. It gave me the quiet, dead sound of a wall with cinder blocks and glue. I called out again. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I said I need help, and I said, is anyone here? And I said, okay. You got me, and let out a laugh after that last one because it came out wrong. I heard the fabric whisper of movement ahead, like someone in a jacket shifting their weight. It took me a second to realize the sound had come not from ahead but from my left. I turned and saw that what I had thought was a solid wall was not entirely. There was a window flush with the surface, the kind of interior observation window you see in hospital corridors, framed so neatly in the paint that it disguised itself at first glance. The glass wasn't transparent. It was the kind that turns milky when the room inside is lit differently than the one you're in. Behind it, I thought I saw a shape, the suggestion of a person's shoulder. I stepped closer and angled my head, and a blurred face moved on the other side, an oval with the business of a nose and mouth and eyes reduced to the idea of them. I raised my hand to the glass. The face mirrored me. Then it did not. It lifted a hand half a second later, a delayed echo, and the hand it lifted was wrong. Too long in the palm, the fingers narrow as reeds. My hand made a print in my breath's fog on the glass. The hand behind made no print at all. Something clicked. The corridor behind me was still turning off, but the pace had quickened again. The shape in the window tilted its head, not like a person asking for clarification, but like a camera adjusting. I pulled back and put space between me and the glass. The drafts of air had grown colder. I went on, and the window followed, if you can call it that. The wall maintained its surface, but the milky rectangle slid along beside me for 3 steps and then receded behind. Another took its place farther ahead. I started to feel the strange sense that the hall was passing me while I walked, that I was a stationary point on a conveyor. I stopped to test that. The cold air brushed my face in a whisper of confirmation. The windows kept migrating. The door I had come through was not visible any longer, because the lights had finished their slow extinction behind me on this level, and I was standing in the single bubble of light that the current fixture allowed. It was like standing in the circle of a spotlight with a black stage everywhere else. I waited and watched the invisible hands finish their job and come for the light over my head. My body made the decision to move before I did. I found myself forward under the next light and felt a shaking in my thighs like a horse after a race. There was another door. This one had a keypad. Numbers lit when I pressed them and then went black again. I tried my birthday. I tried my sister's. I tried 000 because someone always forgets to change the default. Every time the pad buzzed a polite denial. Next to it there was a narrow slot, the kind you might slip a badge through. I put my student ID to it and the reader stayed dumb. I put my driver's license to it as if the state might recognize another state's idea of identity and let me pass. Nothing. I said please to the door. People talk to objects when they feel lonely. It is human to believe you can charm a system. The keypad waited me out. A minute later it turned its light off and the small mechanical click of it reconnecting to its sleep mode sounded exactly like the extinguishing lights had sounded. And that was enough to make me hate it. When I turned from the door there was a bench. A cheap aluminum thing bolted to the wall. Perfunctory furniture for a place that didn't want you to linger. I sat, there wasn't anything to do about it. In that second, sitting down felt like freedom. My knees shook and then slowed. I noticed a discarded paper cup 2 tiles away, the first sign of anyone else's passage. It had a coffee ring staining the bottom. It looked fresh. I reached for it. It skittered an inch and kept skittering on a draft I couldn't feel. I said hello again, and this time a man's voice answered. He spoke right by my ear. I flinched and hit my shoulder on the wall. The voice said quietly, "You need to keep going while the lights are still on." I said, "Where?" The voice said, "Forward, always forward, keep the light." The tone was tired. It carried the resignation of someone repeating a thing beyond argument. I stood up and said, "Who are you?" The voice didn't answer. The window to my right clouded further, as if a breath from inside had fogged it. I leaned closer and caught the shape again. There were 2 shapes now. One was taller. The taller one lifted its too long hand and placed it against the glass. The shorter one seemed to lean. The shorter one matched my height. I kept going. It was either that or sit until the dark took me, and I had a college sophomore's arrogance about my luck. The hallway bent. That was new. The simplicity broke. It didn't turn 90 degrees, just a gradual curve like a riverbed. I followed it, grateful for change, even if it made the world tilt. The exit light at the next door flickered. It was the first time any light in this place had done that. It felt like a concession or a joke. I pushed that door and it moved smoothly, almost happily. Beyond it was not another corridor. Beyond it was the lobby of the rest stop, the same hum of vending machines, the same ice cream freezer rattling like teeth. The missing man's flyer still breathed in the air conditioning. I laughed out loud and clapped my hand over my mouth because I sounded unhinged. I was back. I was back in the fluorescent suburban hell I knew. My backpack sat where I had left it on the bathroom sink counter. I hadn't realized I had left the bathroom without it. Time did a strange slide then. The clock above the display case had a second hand that stuttered around the face. And in the time it took me to cross to it, maybe 5 seconds, it jumped and then jumped back. My phone buzzed with signal like a pond full of crickets. 3 messages from my mom asking if I had made it to the motel yet, sent within the hour. I called her and the call rang and then died. I raised my head and felt it before I saw it. The air was wrong. The building had shifted by a hair. The lobby had a smell of lemon cleaner undercut by winter. The lights at the far end, above the brochures for Amarillo steakhouses and Palo Duro Canyon hikes, shut off one by one. I could see the maintenance man's wet floor sign at the men's room door, the cheerful stick figure mid-slip. The lights on that side began to go, and the darkness came just as deliberate and patient as before. I walked toward the glass entrance doors, keys already in my palm, ready with that precious nonsense every child learns, that if you touch metal you'll be safe. The doors didn't budge. The motor above them hummed, a willing partner without a brain. I pulled and pushed until the slot for the handicap button blinked a dumb blue and went blank. I turned and saw that the darkness had finished its work on the far side and was turning its attention to the ceiling above me. The vending machines tried bravely to exist in the dark neon borders like carnival rides. I could see my reflection in the glass bottle of a soda and thought I looked like someone on the other side of water, a drowned boy. The missing man's flyer tapped the glass with one curled corner. It showed his name now, Mason Jorgensen, age 23, last seen at a rest area on US 84. I hold that paper in my mind the way some people hold prayer cards. I stepped closer and read the line at the bottom that I had not noticed earlier. It said, "If seen, do not approach alone." The words retracted into nothing in the next breath as the light over the flyer died and the box of brochures became a black pillar. I did not want to go back into the bathroom. The door to the women's room was open a crack. A light burned in there like a private sun. It was the only light left on this side besides the lonely square over my head. I said hello and a woman's voice said, tired and resigned, "Keep the light." It was the same cadence as the man's, too measured, as if reading from a script. I stepped into the women's room because the alternative was to be smothered standing still. The room was empty, clean, ghostly. The mirror here had no silvering, and the face it showed me looked not like a stranger but like a picture taken with the flash too close, all shine and white. A hairbrush lay on the counter. There was a single strand of hair, blonde as straw, stuck in it with a little kink. In the far corner where a maintenance door ought to be painted shut, there was the beginning of a corridor. I did what you would do. I went in, I did what he did. I kept the light. I did what she did. I told the person behind me to keep going until I believed it. The hallways are many in one. They circle and narrow and widen and change the way water changes when you pour it into different shapes. But they are the same substance. Sometimes you hear music from a car radio bleeding through as if the concrete has capillaries. Sometimes you find a half-eaten sandwich, a sneer of mustard hardening at the corner of the bread. Sometimes you hear laughter that is not unkind and not kind. The windows come and go with their milky glass in the two long hands. The doors with keypads never open. The exit door sometimes, yes, when you are tired enough to forgive it for leading you back to the same place. If I pass you, if we move in parallel in our separate bright rectangles, I will say keep the light. I will sound like I am reading a line, but I will mean it with all I have left. The last time the door opened onto the lobby, there was a vending machine that had not been there before. A machine for cell phone chargers and sunglasses. In the reflection of its plastic front, I saw the missing man's flyer again. Except this time there was a second photo, low on the page, a little one like a school picture. It showed a college kid with brown hair plastered to his forehead, and an expression like he thought the camera had snapped too soon. The date under his photo was today. The number under it had a 512 area code that belongs to Austin. I stood in the circle of the one light left and felt the quiet breath of the building as it prepared to shut the next one off. I lifted my hand to the glass and waited for the matching hand to rise from the other side. I made myself believe that door would open to a parking lot, that my car would be there, that the sky would be just as black and indifferent as ever, that the road would carry me forward hour by hour until I was out of this part of Texas with its flat distances and empty buildings. Believing is a kind of door, or maybe it is what the door wants. If you stop at the rest area near mile marker 326 on US 84, and the lobby feels 1 degree colder than it should, and your phone stutters like it is remembering you from another place, you can tell yourself the same lies. They will get you as far as the first corridor. After that, the only advice I have is the only advice anyone has. Keep the light. The lights will go out behind you. They always do. The place you reach by keeping them on is not the outside. Not that I have found, but it is better than the other thing. The thing that waits if you let the dark catch up and fold itself around your ankles like a tide. If you meet me there, if you hear me behind your ear, know that I don't want to scare you. Know that I am learning to live in a building that never ends. If I put my hand to the milky glass, don't mirror me. Don't test the print it should make. Walk. Count the hashes if you must. Just walk. If you stop, if you try to see me clearly, you will. That is the last worst truth. The more you look, the more this place looks back. When it knows your face, when it can draw you without a mirror's help, the hallways stop pretending to be hallways. The lights stop waiting their turn and finish you like a breath held too long. I have seen that happen, and it is not bloody and it is not loud. It is clean and simple and permanent, like a line drawn through a name. That is why we speak the one line we have and why we say it like we are resigned. Keep the light. Keep the light and the corridor will lengthen and keep you. And if you are very good, if you learn to time your steps just so, you can reach the door again and again and see the lobby where the soda machine wraps you in its soft neon. And you can tell yourself that you are almost out. You can live a long time on almost. Longer than you think. Long enough to watch your own flyer yellow at the edges and fall away and be replaced by another. Long enough to know the sound of the lights going out not as a threat but as a rhythm. A metronome to move your feet to. Long enough to hear the voice you made for yourself. The one that sits in a tired throat and offers the next person the only thing any of us can offer. Forward, always forward while the light holds. And long enough to understand that the corridor was not made for getting somewhere. It is the somewhere. It is the address. It is what you were always driving toward in the dark. I was west of Waco when I first saw her. A pale sliver between the scrub oaks and the sodium lights, her dress catching the breeze like sheeted water. The rest area sat back from the highway where the asphalt widened and the grass turned to hard pan. A row of picnic shelters leaned in a tired line, and the vending machines hummed like insects. 3 rigs idled nose to tail along the truck side, mine in the middle with its reefer droning softly. It was the hour when the road settles into your bones and every sound comes from far away. I climbed down to stretch my legs and the heat that had held the day broke along my shoulders. She stood by the map kiosk, the old kind with a stained plexiglass roof. Her dress was the color a gull looks against a clouded sky. It was too clean for the place in the moment. No one wears white in the dust of a Texas summer unless they are going to a church or a funeral. She watched me the way deer watch. Not scared exactly, but on the edge of it. There are stories you hear on the CB that you laugh at because it is easier to laugh than let them crawl into your cab. I had heard the one about the woman who appears at rest stops and fuel islands and gravel pullouts, telling you the thing you need to hear. Danger ahead, she says. And the driver who listens finds the jackknifed cattle hauler a mile ahead and takes the farm road around it. Other times she only points and the road she chooses eats the man whole. You chalk it up to talk, the same way you chalk up the voices you think you hear in an empty trailer. When you stop at 2 in the morning on a stretch of US 277, where the cows and stars are the only witnesses. She raised her arm and I felt something like air pressure change inside my head. It was not a gesture like a person would make. She did not beckon. She was pointing. Her hand settled on the dark line of the highway where it slipped north toward Hillsboro, toward Dallas and all the churning lights and swerving cars that come with it. My next run was Amarillo by sunup, then Lubbock by noon. I planned to hook 35, then take 287 through Wichita Falls. Her finger was on that future. "Danger ahead," she said. I heard it clearly, though she did not move her mouth. The words had wear on them like a coin that had passed between too many hands. "You telling me to slow up or take a different route?" I said. My voice came out thin. She turned her face to me, and there were eyes and a mouth and cheekbones, but also a blurring like heat shimmer. Maybe it was a trick of the lights, how the moths circled and the June bugs ticked against the glass. "Danger ahead," she said again, and I felt a surprising rush of relief that she had said anything at all. In the stories, she sometimes stayed quiet. The quiet ones were always the bad ones. I pulled the atlas from the cab and ran my finger along alternatives. I could run west on 84 through Gatesville and Brownwood, then angle north on 183 to get back toward 287. It would add an hour and put me on 2 lanes hemmed with mesquite and fence wire, but the sky over the way she pointed felt wrong to me, weighted like a storm that hadn't formed yet. I thanked her without looking up. When I did, she was gone. The grass around the kiosk had not moved, and the moths kept their circling. The hum of machines resumed as if they had been holding their breath. I went the long way, past a shuttered catfish restaurant in Lampasas with peeling blue paint, past fields where rolled hay sat like sleeping buffalo, past a lonely house near San Saba, where a porch light burned over a swing that creaked with no wind. It felt like driving through someone's memory. When I hit 183 and checked the radio, the chatter bloomed with curses. A wreck had taken the interstate near Hillsboro. Fuel spilled, cruisers blocked lanes, and men fumed about schedules. A driver from Abilene said he had seen a woman in a white dress on the shoulder 10 miles back, and now here they were, stopped cold under a moon the shape of a thumbnail. That's how belief starts on the road. You do not get theology. You get coincidences that pile up until they look like purpose. I made Amarillo in my drop at the processing plant off Lakeside Drive, the air thick with the smell of grain dust and diesel. The day broke like a pale band over the panhandle, and the wind sprang up for no reason like it always does out there. In the diner across from the fuel island, an old man with the color of leather spoke to nobody and everybody about a girl on 287 who had taken to standing near Electra, where the land undulates like the back of something sleeping. He said she saved his life once by telling him he was the danger ahead, that his eyes were closing and the white lines were lifting off the pavement. He pulled into the gravel and slept and woke to sirens a mile north, where a van full of college kids had tangled with a cattle hauler that had braked for a ladder in the road. The old man swore his nap saved him from being part of it. Then he swore that same girl had pointed a friend toward Archer City last winter, and the friend ended up face down in a ditch under frost, thick enough to write your name in. You could tell from his face that he wanted both things to be true. I did not see her again for months, but I thought of her in places the road gave an off flavor. A rest stop on 45 south of Corsicana, where the pine thickens and the air tastes of tar and wet needles. A pullout on US 59 near the red dirt cutbanks where the old highway curves to avoid a creek that does not care for human maps. Every white dress in the corner of my eye set my heart pace. Every woman under the bright canopy at a Love's with a white shirt and tired eyes made my mind make shapes that weren't there. It is a funny thing that loneliness and superstition shake hands so easily. Then one August night, hot as a stove lid, I saw her again at a rest area west of Abilene where the wind farms begin, and the sun turns red before it disappears behind their blades. The lot was nearly empty. A state trooper idled under the shade of a live oak, lights off, window down. Crickets vibrated like a wire under tension. She was standing on the pedestrian bridge that arched over the ditch, the kind built so families don't have to walk across the truck lanes with children half asleep. Her dress moved around her legs as if water were rising from the ditch and running past her. This time she did not speak. She raised her arm and pointed not toward the highway but toward a gravel road that ran south beside a field stubbled with cotton. I felt a coldness settle through the heat that was not natural. It was the cold you get inside a house right before the power goes out when you feel silence step into the room. "Say it," I said, and my voice startled a mockingbird. "Say what you said before." She looked toward the gravel road again. In the distance, a set of headlights bounced near the horizon. The trooper in the shade rolled forward and turned up the ramp toward the interstate, where far off a flash of hazard lights winked. There was a smell of rain, though none had fallen for weeks. I reached for the atlas and then stopped. The gravel road ran toward Lake Fort Phantom Hill if it kept going more or less straight. The lake would be black now and the spillway would mumble its uneasy song. I thought of all the places in Texas that gather the dead. Not because they are cursed, but because the living bring their curses there and leave them behind. Lakes do not ask for anything. They take what they are given. I wanted her to talk. It felt like a test of some kind, and the worst tests are the ones you do not understand. I climbed the pedestrian bridge and stood a few feet away. The air around her was cooler, as if she carried a pocket of weather. "You saved me once," I said. "You said danger ahead, and you were right." She lowered her arm, and I felt a soft pressure in my chest. I smelled fresh-cut grass, and for a second I knew I was remembering my father's yard in Austin, and the way the mower left green stripes on my shoes. Grief and memory tangle that way. Whatever she was, she borrowed familiar strings to pluck. "Sometimes I am allowed to speak," she said. "Allowed by who?" She turned her face to me, and I saw the small, ordinary things of a life. A faint freckle on the left cheek. A hairline too straight to have come from a brush. A thin white scar angled at the base of her throat. In the wind, the fabric clung to her knees. She was a person and she was not. Both can be true when the road is the church and night is the sermon. "You think I'm a ghost," she said, though I had not formed the word. "You think I was a woman once who died on a road and came back to wave a lantern forever." "What were you?" I said, and then changed it without thinking. "What are you?" The headlights at the horizon moved closer, 2 sets now dragging dust behind them. The trooper's car had turned into a glitter far off. The hum of the interstate was a tide between us. "You won't like the answer," she said. "Say it anyway." She raised her hand again, but this time she pointed at me. The urge to step back fought with the urge to stand, and both of them lost. I wanted to be defended against nothing, and also to lean into it, like scratching an itch that will not be satisfied. "You make the danger," she said. "You carry it with you. You are tired and you lie to yourself about your reflexes. You drink coffee and tell your body what it needs. You think lanes are promises, not paint. You look down when the phone lights. You add time where there is no time. You tie your anger to strangers who drift in your lane for a second. You feel alone and make decisions to stay alone and then wonder why the dark feels personal." For a moment I did not breathe. Her voice had not raised. It listed facts like a way station scale. "Am I going to hurt someone?" I said. There was a high whine in my ears. The 2 sets of headlights were almost to the rest area now. A white pickup leading, a low car following hard. I felt in my body that if I turned toward the gravel road, the rest would right itself without my hand. The ending had weight and wanted to land. "Not tonight," she said. "Not if you sit in your cab and close your eyes and let the cool air wash over your face while the wind moves the grass. Not if you think of someone you have not thought of in years and let that ache work on you until it changes something small." The white pickup took the exit to the rest area, and I nodded to the driver out of habit. The low car sped past, then braked, then came back around on the frontage road too fast for what it was. The state trooper's glitter resolved into flashing lights a mile down. I turned toward my rig, and when I looked back, she was gone. I slept for 2 hours while insects painted the windshield, and the southwest wind buffeted the trailer. When I woke, I knew what I would do. The next time she pointed without speaking, I would not go where she wanted me to go. I would find out where she had come from and what she worked for or against. It is a particular kind of madness the road breeds. The belief that you can take the thing that tugs your sleeve at the edge of vision and pull it into understanding. I bought a local paper from a machine, the kind that leaves newsprint on your fingers. There was a 2-year-old highway death notice for a woman near Lake Fort Phantom Hill. A car burned on its roof. There was a 3-paragraph story from 10 years back about a church van near Brownwood that rolled after a tire peeled itself apart from the rim. There was a ghost story in a column from the early 80s about a lady in white on Highway 16 who stood in the light of a moon like a coin. Texas keeps its tragedies like we keep cattle, in pens too small for their brimming weight. I started, asking at diners, showing my face enough that a waitress in Cisco said I would bring eyes if I kept talking about angels. In a truck stop near Brady, a man in a cap with a feed company logo told me his cousin had picked her up as a hitchhiker outside Big Spring, and she had pointed to the dashboard clock and said to pull into the next rest stop and wait 4 minutes. He did, and the 4 minutes passed in silence. And then a tanker blew a tire right where he would have been if he had stayed on the shoulder. The man in the cap leaned toward me. He said a month later his cousin saw the woman again at a picnic shelter near Sterling City. And this time she did not speak. And this time the cousin had followed where she pointed, out onto a county road that narrowed and narrowed until it was barely wide enough for one vehicle. He found a gate and a dirt track and no more of anything you could call a road. They found his truck later straddling a cattle guard, engine idling, door open. The cousin was gone. Crows took away the evidence before anyone thought to look beyond the fence line. I told myself that stories grow like weeds and sometimes are only weeds. I told myself that coincidence is the continent and meaning is the island, and my tires stayed more on the continent. Then one night near Lake Whitney, where the limestone cuts show their pale bones at the edge of the water, where fishermen leave bait cups and cold fire rings in the state park, and you can smell cedar when the wind is right, I saw her for the third time. It was past midnight and the moon was a dull pearl. A rest area that had once been proud of its new picnic tables and now wore graffiti like old scars sat back from the highway. I pulled in because the steering wheel had started to drift in my hands, which is how I know the hour has dug its teeth into me. The heat of the day still radiated from the concrete. I locked my cab and walked toward the vending machines, and there she was under the fluorescent buzz, as calm as a nurse at the end of a 12-hour shift. She raised her hand and pointed toward a narrow park road that led down to the lake. The trees arched across it, and the dark under them had depth. I stopped where I was. "Talk," I said. "Tell me what you want to tell me or say nothing forever. No more of this pointing at the strangest road you can find and watching the ants crawl your way." She tilted her head. A fox moved at the edge of the brush and froze, then eased back into shadow. On the lake, a boat motor coughed and died. "I'm allowed to speak sometimes," she said again, and I felt anger rise like heat. It sharpened my mind for a moment. "Allowed by who?" I said, and then the word slid out the way a sore tooth slides under your tongue. "By what?" "The thing you pull behind you," she said. "The thing all of you pull behind you and call your life." "I haul produce or pallets or construction staples. I pull freight, not fate. You all call it by different names," she said. "Some make jokes about gremlins and some say God and some say the wind. You gather decisions and accidents and lies and small kind moments, and all of it wraps behind you like a wake. At certain places, the wake piles up against the banks and spills over. Those places collect the overflow. Lakes, intersections, cut banks, long straight runs between towns where the horizon rocks like a cradle. Are you telling me that places make us do things? I am telling you that the things you bring travel with you, and sometimes the ground takes them like a tithe. I am telling you that I am not a person in the way you mean the word, though once I was." There it was. The once I was. "Who were you?" I asked. "A woman who put a cooler full of drinks in her trunk and drove to meet her husband by a river," she said. "A woman who stopped at a rest area with a rash on her neck and a headache behind her eyes. A woman whose phone rang. A woman who looked at the screen while the lines on the road rose like seams. A woman who woke on the ceiling of a room with voices in it and then woke further away and realized her life had turned into stories other people told." "Lake Whitney," I said before I could stop. The cedar moved against itself. The fox lifted its nose and tasted the air. "Not yours," she said, and a soft pity threaded the words. "People like the shape of a woman in white. They like a wedding that never was. They like a mother and a child. They like innocence and debt. They like a face to put their decisions on when the road goes bad. I can be that if it helps. I can be a mirror if a mirror will stop your hands from turning." At the far end of the lot, a small car pulled in and parked too fast. A young man climbed out, glanced around, and lit a cigarette in cupped hands. His shirt stuck to him. He stood in the shadow of a light pole and looked as if he was trying not to cry. The woman in white turned toward him, then toward me again. "Are you going to warn him?" I said. "Is this the kind where you speak, or the kind where you point?" She lifted her arm and pointed toward the park road, the one that curled into darkness under the trees. The young man crushed his cigarette and got back in his car, He started the engine and I felt something like an undertow tug at my ankles. "No," I said, and I moved without thinking. I stepped into the lane and raised my hand. The car hesitated, then idled. The woman stood very still. I walked to the driver's window and the young man lowered it an inch. "You headed down to the lake," I said. He nodded. His eyes were wide and too bright. He was the age of a boy you see mowing his mother's yard, or the age of a boy who lifts a deer into the back of a pickup and grunts in satisfaction, or the age of a boy who is about to make a mistake big enough to echo. "Don't," I said. "The road is narrow and trees drop branches after a day like this. Park up here, walk if you need air." He looked at me for a long second. He asked me if I was a cop. I said I wasn't a cop. He asked me if I had a right to tell him anything. I said I didn't have a right. He said he would sit a while. I thanked him for nothing in particular and stepped back. He turned off the engine and leaned his head on the wheel. I walked back to the woman and felt a strange shame. She lifted her hand, and this time she pointed at me again. "You're the last one I can speak to," she said. "The last one I am allowed. After this, it is pointing only." "Allowed by what?" I said again, though the answer I did not want was beginning to form. "The trade," she said. "Warning costs. The littlest warnings cost little and the biggest ones cost more. Someone pays. If I tell you to stop, the road takes it from another place. If I point, it takes it from the one who goes. Balance is not a moral word. It is a weight word. So when you saved me near Waco, someone else did not get saved," I said. The night sagged in my shoulders. The lake breathed and the cedar creaked. The young man in his car had his eyes closed. "Someone did not get saved," she said. "I do not get to pick which. The wake carries what it carries." "Why tell me this?" I asked, and I felt the question pull like a knot tightening. "Why not stay your ghost and haunt your bridges and point without the burden of explanation?" "Because you made yourself into a person who asks," she said. "Because your asking is a kind of payment too. Because once I was a person who asked and the places cannot take that from me." She turned and began to walk toward the shadow under the trees. I followed her even though everything in me said to get back in the cab and lock the doors and drive until the dawn thinned the world enough to make it ordinary. The path smelled of soil and old leaves. The lake was a dull gleam at the bottom of a slope, and something moved there like breath. We stopped at the edge of the water. A heron lifted itself with a sound like someone folding a sheet. The woman stood with her hands at her sides. "This place is fat with what people bring to it," she said. "They bring fights here. They bring secrets. They bring gasoline cans. They bring rings they no longer want. It is the same near the big interstates where the lanes plat together and the trucks thunder. You pour your lives into the strips of time you think you cannot afford to waste, and the earth takes its share." "I do not want to be part of this," I said. And the words were the truest I had spoken, and they did not change anything. "You already are part of it," she said. "The question is, which part?" Behind us, tires hissed on the highway like a greeting from something that could not help itself. The young man's car door clicked. He got out and stood with his hands on the roof. The woman lifted her face toward him, and I understood the rules without being told. If I asked her to speak to him, if I asked for one more allowance, the cost would be located elsewhere. Maybe a woman in a minivan with a sleeping child would glance down at a phone at the wrong curve on 281, maybe. A rancher hauling a trailer on 16 would drift a foot toward the center line. At the same moment, a man in a dually reached for his drink. The trade would happen, and I would never know. Ignorance is the softest pillow. "Don't do it," I said to the night, though I did not say who I was talking to. "Don't talk. Don't point. Let this be still." The woman stood very still. A wind came off the water that smelled like fish and damp limestone. The young man stared into the dark as if it were a window that would show him something he wanted to see. The highway's long breath rose and fell. I could have decided to leave then. I could have decided to walk back and climb into my seat and start the engine and roll away like a man who had never stopped. Instead, I stood with the woman and learned there are moments that hold you because they are waiting to become stories. When the young man started down the park road alone, on foot, when he passed us without seeing us, when he stumbled and caught himself and kept going toward the lake, something inside me twisted into a shape that could not be untied. I followed him because I could not follow him, and we reached the shore where a slab of concrete angled into the water like a tongue. He stepped onto it and looked up at the sky and made a sound that was part laugh, part sob. Across the water, a boat light winked, then winked again. The boy took another step so that his shoes were in the black, and I reached for his arm. And the woman did not move. He turned toward me with eyes like a deer's. He said he had come here once with someone who told him not to be afraid of the dark, because the dark was only what the day looked like with the light turned off. He said he had tried to make that into a gospel. He said he was tired. He said he did not want to drive on because the road had opened like a river in his mind, and he was not sure he knew how to swim. "Sit," I said. "Sit right here and listen to the lake and smell the cedar and breathe until your chest stops hurting." He sat. He bent forward and put his face in his hands and made the sound of a man pulling a hook out of a fish's mouth. A sharp intake and then relief. I stood with him until the sound smoothed. When I turned, the woman was gone. The heron had settled again somewhere in the reeds, and the shore made a quiet licking sound the way it will when the wind shifts an inch. I walked the boy back to his car. He thanked me, which felt like a mistake, and then he drove away without going down the road under the trees. At the top of the lot, I stopped and looked toward the highway. A semi blew past with a trailer stacked with pallets. Another low car slipped along in its wake. A pickup sat with its blinker on half a mile up, thinking about moving over and then not doing it. The night pressed close and then less close as the breeze moved. I did not see the woman again for a long time. When I did, it was in a place I had not planned to be. North of Graham, the sky goes big and the road runs true for a while. And I was in that trance you get when the white lines are your only company, and the radio is telling you about a storm 2 counties over. Ahead, the road narrowed for a bridge over Salt Fork Brazos water that showed its sandbars like ribs. I had been awake too long, and I had told myself that Amarillo by dawn was still possible, though the clock had started to argue. I glanced down when my phone buzzed because I'm not better than anyone else, and when my eyes came up, she was standing at the shoulder just before the bridge. She lifted an arm and pointed straight ahead at the bridge. She did not speak. There was a blackness to that bridge deeper than the surrounding dark, and the water below looked like a skin pulled too tight. I felt the weight of every hour I had stolen from sleep. I felt the whole caravan of my decisions on the hitch behind me. I could have braked then. I could have pulled onto the shoulder before the guardrail rose and let another man behind me curse and roll his eyes and go around. Instead, I watched her hand and felt a defiance that I wish I could tell you was righteous. I told myself I would not be moved by shadows. I went onto the bridge and the trailer bobbed like a boat. A gust came crossways, not strong but tricky. A low car coming the other way crossed the center by 6 inches and then corrected. A tire on my right front sang its little song and then stopped. In the span between breath and breath, something skittered out of a drain onto the roadway and moved and was gone, and I flinched at nothing. The guardrail flickered along like a metronome. I reached the other side and exhaled, and the laugh that came out of me had no humor. In the mirror, the woman still stood where she had been. And then a pickup with a camper shell crossed the bridge I had just left. It was halfway across when a second gust came, a harder one this time, and the driver put his wheel a hair too much to the left and his rear tire caught the line of the raised seam where the bridge met the asphalt. He corrected again, and each correction dragged him further. He clipped the guardrail with a sound I could not hear but felt in my jaw, and the camper shell lifted a little, and the truck skipped like a stone and then climbed the rail and then tipped. It slid on its side like a man trying to decide whether to fall, and then it went over, slowly and then too fast. And the sound of it arriving in the shallow water came late and hard. I pulled onto the shoulder and set my brakes and ran. I climbed the rail without thinking and dropped to the sandbar, knees jarring, then waded and then swam. The truck had landed on the driver's side and the passenger window was a dark plate. The camper shell had cracked like an egg and a cooler bobbed and then went under. I got my fingers under the edge of the door and pulled, and the metal did not move and the water pushed at my knees. And when I put my face to the glass, I saw a woman looking back at me with her mouth open and her hair plastered to her forehead. She was not the woman in white. She was a person with a necklace and a mole on her cheek and a seatbelt cutting her chest and a ring on her finger that flashed when the water moved. She pounded the glass and bubbles squealed from the corner of her lips. There is no music to what comes next. There is only the part where muscles either do the thing or they do not. My muscles did not. I had no tool. There was a moment when the world goes very narrow and you understand the limits of your body like a diagram. The water made a sound like someone talking under a blanket. The woman's eyes filled the space between us. Then something broke unseen and the truck tilted and the water sloshed and the current pulled. And I had to choose between drowning alongside a stranger and climbing to get help that would not be in time. I did the thing men do most of the time. I climbed. By the time the first other car stopped, by the time a man ran with a tire iron, by the time a state trooper's lights threw the riverbank into a carnival of color, the water had gone quiet. The world introduced my failure to me with the gentle clarity of light on a stainless steel countertop. There was no use for my name in that moment. The woman in white stood at the end of the bridge again. She had not moved. She did not raise her arm. She did not have to. I already understood the cost of every word that had ever been spared for me. In the days after, I read the write-ups and the clean little lines that say things like fatigue may have been a factor, and alcohol is not suspected. I sat in my cab in a truck stop outside Vernon and watched men go in and out of the showers with their bags and flip-flops and thought how everyone carries their own small ocean. I thought about the trade. I thought about the boy at Lake Whitney and the way his breath had shuddered into smoothness, while somewhere else a woman's life was being counted in seconds. I kept driving because that is what you do when your living is tied to motion. I have not seen her since the bridge. Or rather, I have seen her every time I close my eyes in the hour when your thoughts get sticky. She is in the edge of vision at a pullout on 281 tucked under live oaks. She is in the glare of a station sign near Childress where bugs fling themselves at light. She is the pale flash of a dress on the causeway over Lake Buchanan. When the wind rakes the water into fur, she points when I dream and does not point when I wake. I have come to hate and crave the weight of the choice. I tell myself if I stop for every shadow, I will never make Amarillo by dawn again and my life will bleed out. And then I think of the woman's hands against the glass and the necklace and the mole and the way the water made the world slow. Maybe you have your own rest area stories. Maybe you have seen her and turned where she told you and arrived somewhere safe with your heart drumming and your mouth dry, and you called that safety grace. Maybe you have followed her pointing down some lonely service road and taken a curve on crushed limestone where the white dust rose, and your tires slithered and you called the way you survived the work of a lucky star. I cannot argue with what makes you keep moving. I only know that sometimes at night when I pass a picnic shelter and the lights pool under it like pale water, I think I see her, and I have to grip the wheel and choose. If she raises her hand for me again, I think I will not ask her to speak. I think I will take whatever the pointing means and follow it until I am part of the story that gets told at diner counters and fuel islands. The one about the driver who went where the woman in white sent him and did not come back. I'm not saying this because I want to go. I am saying it because I think I understand now. The wake behind me has to wash somewhere. The places are waiting, patient and without malice, to take their share. If the price of warning has to be paid, better that I pay it with my own name. And if, by some twist in the rules I do not know, the payment is different, if speaking for me once more takes something from someone I will never meet, I hope she keeps her hand at her side. I hope she says nothing at all. I hope I am pointed toward the road that will have me and I will go down it with my eyes open, seeing the lines and the guardrails and the sudden movements that make a life tilt, and I will be one less man who drags his questions behind him through the dark. The highway ahead is long and the lights are few and the lakes keep their own counsel, and there are women in white at the edges of all of it, waiting to see which direction your hands will turn.